Great. Okay, staff summary. Any questions or comments? Want to talk about anything further?
I had one question about the Camp Hale thing, and the last line talks about narrowing down the concept options to determine a final plan. What's the time frame you think for that?
Well, I don't know exactly. I don't know when Volpe will get back to the county and the Forest Service. I would guess the next month or two, and then the Forest Service and county are going to take it over and figure out how to get more public input from that point. But I don't know for certain. I know the Volpe scope of work is ending, I believe next month. So then they'll be handing it over.
And then it's another year or so before anything actually happens.
That's up to just the stakeholders. I mean, what we'll get out of this are recommendations, and then it's up to the Forest Service and county and town and Blue River and, all the stakeholders to decide what they want to do with those recommendations. So that's like a next step that's independent of the recommendations.
Thanks.
Yep.
Did you want to talk about the staffing, the Forest Service staffing?
Yeah, I don't know if you were able to read that article, but we did have a Golden Horseshoe Committee meeting, and the Forest Service representatives there made clear that they can't hire any seasonal staff in their fiscal year of 2025, which is October till October. And they can't take on any new NEPA reviews. And the ones that they have, they're supposed to be doing 5, not whatever's on their list. And any new ones that they accept next year, if they can take on new ones, would be, back of the line. And they're frustrated about it as well. They're very worried about their ologists, their wildlife biologists, and their hydrologists, and their archaeologists burning out because their workload is high and there's so few of them. So I don't know if they had a lot of good solutions. It seems like they had recently got that directive when we met with them, but that's what they told us. They even called out specifically that doesn't matter if you have a consultant like the SE group, Cindy Ebert mentioned them by name, we still can't get to it any faster than anything else. And at this point, we're backlogged.
And they can't hire independent contractors to do this work for them. It's part of what they can't hire.
I think that's right.
I mean, I understand about not being able to put people on the public payroll as employees, but sometimes governments get around those restrictions by contracting out.
Yeah, I'm not sure. We have looked into using the SE group for some of this stuff. I spoke with Pete Swenson, who works for the town of Frisco, and he's had a great experience with them. They're expensive, but he compared them to accountants. In theory, you can do your own taxes, but you instead get people to help you with it, and that streamlines the process, and that will help with the Forest Service, but that doesn't speed up when they can get to review these applications.
And did the ones that we've been talking about in the last recent couple of months, did those get submitted or not? They're not not there yet. Okay.
We're scheduled to meet with them end of November, early December. We got to pick a date, and that's when we'll go through specific ideas and at least get their, independent of NEPA, just their initial impression on whether they think this could make sense, and then we can pursue the NEPA stuff and just get in our turn in line. Yeah, Tony just mentioned slalom. So one possibility for slalom we can pursue is we figured out that there's enough of land that's controlled by the county and the town and not the Forest Service that we could fit a adjacent trail in there for uphill use or just hiking or whatever we want to do. We can talk about that more later, but there is the possibility of doing that without Forest Service approval in that area.
That'd be good.
So that's one potential workaround.
Thank you.
I was curious if anyone saw the new Forest Service signs in the Golden Horseshoe, which I think look great, like the new Carcinite signs and proper trail signs.
Mhm.
And my curiosity was, do they work with you at all? Because I know we're helping manage that area.
We've had a few meetings with the Forest Service about that signage and coordinating with them. It's, it's a slow process with them, but we have been coordinating and they are open to, directions that we're moving in, and they communicate to us like kind of what they're thinking about and trying to also improve some wayfinding of like, here's the end of this intersection that, 2 or 3 miles, you'll get to Humbug Hill, or just, overall improvement of just not identifying the trail, but also improve wayfinding to specific sites as well. So I think it's been a good partnership with them and some good communication.
Look good. Do you see him? Anyone see him? Yeah. Anything else on staff summary? Okay, we can move on to signage, merge.
Great. John Bozio from Merge has come to share a few concept ideas and just discuss the project. And thanks for coming, John. I think, Tony, if we pull up the packet.
Just said your fix.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
See how good we are at this stuff?
Together.
No. Well, the packet will work, and then we can give you the mouse, John, if you'd like. Okay.
We fixed some stuff.
Well, I can work on that tomorrow morning to try to have it for council, so that works then. Is it on?
Let me, let's see.
Oh, Tony's going to share the screen so those watching from home can see the presentation. Thanks, Tony.
Save questions for the end or when something comes up?
I
Which you
think
wanna
we'll
do?
have like a pretty robust discussion, so maybe,
As we're going along or at the end?
okay.
It's a little bit long, so I'm gonna try to move through it.
Thanks.
Hello, everybody. Again, I'm John Bozio from Merge. Thank you for having us here today. We've been working over the past several weeks with Alex and Tony and Duke on a variety of wayfinding analysis and schematic design, which we're going to present to you tonight. Tomorrow, we are meeting with stakeholders. We have 2 meetings with them as well as council to go through this. We're very much at the beginning of this, so it's concepts and options and ideas, and we're trying to get as much information as possible, and then we'll come back. We have 3 options. Usually we come back, it's like option 4. This is the positive and negative things we heard, and then we have an option 4 version. I think, before we get into design, we were here before, we visited with stakeholders, but then we also did an online survey. We had 197 total responses, and this was mainly on wayfinding information. What were the top destinations when utilizing the trail? So connecting trails and next access point were at the top of that list. And that's important from a signage standpoint, right? Because that's what we're trying to improve, that recognition of where you can access the trail, and then how do I get to another trail? So I don't get deep into that and I can't find my way back to where I started. So they were some of the top things. We had some quotes in here from the different people who went through the survey.
Sorry. Did you pull those quotes just because you kind of thought they were points that you were going to be working from, or that were?
Yeah, they were things that maybe got mentioned more than once, or that we heard in the stakeholder meetings as well. So we tend to use things that it's not just a one-time comment, but it's repeated over and over, maybe in a different way, but it sort of gives us an umbrella of quotes to look at. So some of the survey results on how often do you utilize the trail system? Why do you use it? Is it for health and wellness or for recreational purposes or just passive recreation? So these are always helpful. I think one thing that's always important to remember is that when you take these surveys from a wayfinding standpoint, often trail users who use it a lot are the ones who are responding. The signage is for people who don't use it. Right. So it's very helpful for us, but at the same time, we want to look at things that first time user and here in Breck, you have a lot of that, right? So people who are not used to being out there. So they're the things that we also are looking at as well.
Can you tell
Um,
me what the color coding for the bar graphs represent?
it's just colors.
Okay.
Yeah,
so
yeah,
it
there's
didn't-
no-
You didn't try and
yeah.
tie that back to the other
No.
circles or anything. Okay, thank you.
Just some more questions. Do you agree with the following statement? The trail system is easy to access. So really, that was a high percentage point for it, but that is parts that when we went out to see different areas, again, there are people who know where the trail may be. Do you agree with the following statement? The trail system is easy to follow. Again, that ranked high as well. And then please select the descriptors that encompass your experience of the trail. So there's a variety of not only physical aspects of the trails, but there's also just sort of emotional things that you might find as part of the responses. Then we got into the wayfinding analysis. So often people look at what we do, and when we submit our portfolio, they look at the attractiveness of a sign, but at the same time, you're really trying to organize information, right? That's like the basis of what we do. And then you apply the aesthetic. So we're going to take you through some of that analysis. When you think about wayfinding, I may have said this in earlier meetings, that people think we come into town, we run around, we put up signs everywhere, and then we're done. That's not what we do. We really try to think about it in ways of what kind of elements people utilize beyond just signage, right? So from an identity standpoint, is there something that identifies the trail as a recognizable sort of a beacon in the that I can reference from a distance? Is there a digital component to this? So we did ask about the Be Breck app because that was something that was recently rolled out for the trails. That does not get a lot of use according to the survey. So it is a piece of it, but it's not the end all solution for wayfinding. The environment and how that plays a role in your ability to find your way. So we all use landmarks to find our way, whether that's as simple as going by a large rock or a sculpture like the troll or some other element. We use that to find our way. So we want to take advantage of that at times. Also in your trail system, it's lots of trails that get connected. This is not a loop trail where you start at one end and you go around. It's not an urban trail where you may go up onto a road and then deep into, and then back onto into a park. So that is a little bit different when we're starting to design the signs as well. Support information, so maps, brochures, all of those kind of things that the tourism group hands out. We want to make sure that terminology wise and nomenclature wise and graphics wise, we're using the same thing. So all of these elements start to talk to each other. And then with the signage, you can always think of wayfinding signage from a big picture in. So how do I get to the trail? Do I identify the trail once I'm on it? Am I told what I can and cannot do? Am I making a connection to another trail? Is there an orientation device on all the wayfinding sites to get you back to a major landmark? Does it get you back to downtown? Does it get you back to the gondola? Having that sort of as the first listing on every sign will give people an orientation. Unlike when you're in a loop where you know where you're going to end up, here, not so much. So we just looked at a couple of those other tools. These are some of your existing maps that people utilize. When you use the Summit County map, it's tiny information. It's really hard to follow. The Welcome Center town map, it's getting a little bit better, but we're looking at, can you really graphically do things and create a map that gives you landmarks, that identifies different types of trails. And these are just different examples from different places that we've worked on. One of the things that came out of our stakeholder meetings especially with the bike shops, was having a black and white version where they can draw on it and give people direction to that nearest trailhead from the bike shop. So that was something we had done in another project in Callaway Gardens. So we're just showing you how you could have a full color map, and then you can have a more functional map for those places where they are actually making that connection from a certain spot to a trailhead or to a trail. So that was just a recommendation that we would look at. Of course, this is what's out there now. There's no consistency, and this is why we're here. So to look at the signage and really try and get it organized. That's what this is about. It's organizing information, creating a hierarchy, and decluttering. So when we don't have 6 signs to tell 3 messages, right? So you'll see how we've tried to bring that consistency into it when we get into the designs. Also, just looking at, like the totem, which is right in the center here, and you'll see this in some future ones. It's trying to do a lot of stuff, right? It's got the logos on it. It's telling you which way to go. It's got the difficulty. It's telling you what you can do, what you can't do, what you can do in the summer, what you can do in the winter. It's trying to accomplish too much. And if you can try and find different elements to establish that in a more organized way, that's how you can start to help it out. Landmarks, right? We talked about that. So I know in our stakeholder meetings, a lot of people say, I take the gondola up, getting over to the nature preserve, that entrance that comes in the back way. Like there's nothing that tells you how to get there. So, but the gondola in their mind, once they do find their way there, they have to get back to that. So the troll's an obvious one. Getting back to downtown, all these things are giving people an orientation to, in your mind, you're trying to build a cognitive map to where you are. And these are the things that do that for you. So if you can bring that into, say, maps or on the signs and telling people where those things are, that reroutes them in their mind as to, okay, I know where I am. It's behind me. It's in front of me, that sort of thing, even though they're in the middle of the woods at times. This is really the crux of the problem, or the ingredients of the problem. We have to identify what information is needed on the trails, and then we have to apply it to the appropriate wayfinding tool, right? So when the information considerations, this all came out of the stakeholder meetings. We know there's the trail name, there's the county logo, the town name and logo. We may have to leave no trace, there's direction, trail difficulty, recreational activities, a map, rules, QR codes, event information, community postings. Can we do things bilingually? These are all things that people want. You can't put all that on one sign, right? You would have way too much information. That's another thing to think about when you look at the signage designs and as we go through the hierarchy, is that at a certain point, when you create signs with too much information, you're sort of going over the point of no return as to people just won't comprehend it. They won't even look at it, right? They're not going to sit there and read it. So if you can give them little bits of information, it's a basic principle in wayfinding is tell me only what I need to know right now, right? You don't pull up to a hospital and see signs for room 232. You get people to the right building, the right wing, the right floor, the right department. And that's how wayfinding works. You bring people in. So that's something that we tried to look at when we started to say, okay, this is all the information we have. And these are the types of signs that are necessary on the trail. So this is one of my favorite pictures. It's just a wall. It's just like a wall of signs. It totally blocks like where the entry to the trail is. In fact, the sign is right in the middle of where you need to walk in that number in the letter A, right? So there's lots of information there. It's telling you what you can do, what you can't do. And that's one of the things we tried to look at is how can we still have that information, but be a little bit more cognizant of where things are located. And you'll see that later in some photo renderings.
Anybody here that was there when A was put in? Was it put in there intentionally to slow traffic, or
I
was
think
there a
the
reason?
trail on the right is a
I think
social
that's
trail.
just people using it, going to the right when they should.
So that's like a little tiny social connection. Gotcha.
So if you look at it from the top, you see that you have plan view, you see how you basically have 5 signs all sort of clustered in there at the same time. What we want to look at is, can we spread them out a little bit more? So, you still have the trail identification sign. That's your beacon that you see across the way and marks the entry of the trail. You have B as the kiosk, which remains where it is. But then you start to have things like regulatory or informational signs that are just a step or two in. You're not creating it right across the entrance of it, but you're letting people take a step in before you're telling them what they should or shouldn't do. And you'll see that as we look at some of the trailheads. And then the directional signs, you really don't need that until you get down into an intersection or farther down into the trail. So what we were looking at is, taking the existing totem and keeping that, but minimizing or reducing the number of pictograms that are on there. Just tell people what you can do, and then add a post that would have the trail name, get that up a little bit higher, something I could see from a distance. Have your kiosk with the trail name up there, so you're reinforcing it. You'll see we also added an area for the different logos that are necessary for the trail managers, and then your directional signs, trail rules, and then regulatory signs as well. So just having those as separate elements, ultimately trying to find configurations and ways to maybe stack them on top of each other. It really is going to depend on the situation at any given trailhead, but it's sort of organizing the information. You'll see it a little bit more as we go through this. So this is sort of an improved scenario where you have this with the logos here, with all that information, but now you're just saying, this is the trail name real clearly. This is what you can do. This is the difficulty. And then on the kiosk, you have more of your trail rules, your community events, the name of the trail. You have your logos of the owners or managers of that trail. This is just a real simple sort of thought process of it. We, of course, want to start to use pictograms. I don't know that you really need to say this is what you can do with this in the summer and winter. Right now, they're, I think, blue for the winter and red for this. Is it red for the summer? No, it's yellow for the summer, right?
Mix.
It's a mix. It's color coded, but it doesn't, like, nobody would understand what the color coding means, and then what you can and cannot do, right?
Do we have BMX destinations on our trails now? Or that's a separate little logo?
Bobby, we have on some of our posts, we have like 2 B&B trailhead or 2 slalom there, but they look like the trail name banner, but it's like 2 town, or we have, is that what you're asking
No,
about?
I'm asking about the little summer activity called BMX, that symbol. Do we?
No, we don't have a
That wouldn't be one we
BMX.
probably need. Okay,
Like,
just curious.
That's little, yeah.
seemed to first.
Are you
Oh.
just given your question, are you proposing that like summer and winter activities would be different colors? Or just
No,
keep it all the same?
just keep them all the same. But I mean, we're early, so
Yeah.
we can make that decision. The trail etiquette signs. So one of the things we asked in the survey were, what kind of etiquette is necessary out there. So that's what came, that's where this sort of came from. You'll see the friendly ones, with the one in the middle. We're going to keep that as part of this, and you'll see that along the way with the regulatory signs as well. But all the other ones that are just sort of random, the idea is to try and get those to have a consistent look and feel for what the necessity requires. I mean, there's certain times you want to tell someone to stop doing that. You need to have some restrictive language, and there's other times when it can be a little bit friendlier. And there's you'll see it, there's a sort of a spectrum in between there. So we think like the friendly signs, they're sort of on the far right of this spectrum, and then a stop sign is on the far left. So you'll see that as we go through it, but we think that you can keep these and just place them as necessary.
Do you have experience that says that the friendly, please pick up after your damn dog, is effective versus pick up after your dog? Pick up
Do I have
dog.
research for that? No, but I would say that just knowing when we do rule signs that it's a balance, right? You do not want to start to put up no, 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 and tell people they can't do anything. And at the same time, I would say that it's probably okay where it's not really a problem, right? Where you're just trying to inform people. But if you're really trying to get somebody to stop doing something in a certain spot, you have to be a little bit more forceful. And I think you just start to identify those spots where you're just informing somebody like this one, you're just informing them along the way. So when they go other places that, hey, be mindful of this. But in order to get somebody to stop, you really want to get somebody to stop, tell them there's an ordinance, right? If there's an ordinance number on it, people tend to stop with that too. So from that, we start to look at a generic menu. So doesn't mean you're going to have every one of these signs, but we start to look at what are all the different configurations or sign types, no design applied, that could be necessary for this project. So the first two are really getting people to a trail, maybe along a road, and then you're identifying the trailhead. You get out of your car, there's a kiosk. Then there may be a smaller version of it. You may have, signs that tell you what you cannot do, more listed of trail rules, directional signs, whether that's above, overhead, which may be more in, if a trail sort of comes into the downtown, it has to be in a more urban area compared to a totem, which may be out on, more in the woods. And then you can have bicycle signs as well for the specific trails. And then we start to get into accessible parking in your parking lots. We're getting into like every sign you could possibly need. Regulatory signs. Now, the regulatory signs and informational signs, we've started to catalog a lot of that information. So ultimately, there will be a layout for all the different messages that you have or may need. And at least also giving you a standard. So in the future, if a new message comes up, you have something to follow. And then we just started to look at a couple of the trailheads and, potential locations of how things may happen. So this is the B&B trailhead where on the road, you'll see a sign that pulls you in. You pull in, you get out of your car. There's the kiosk, there's the trailhead. And as you take a few steps in, there's a rule sign and perhaps an etiquette sign. And we did it for Illinois Creek. Troll. This was another one that we picked out in the stakeholder meetings. A lot of people said people get off the shuttle and they have no way to know how to get over to the troll. So that's why we picked this, that you definitely would need some sort of at the shuttle stop, a directional sign that gets you over there, and then something that you can see from across that parking lot that just cues you that that's where the trailhead is. And you'll see that in some photo renderings too. This is Carter Park. This was different because now you're going towards you're parking in a parking lot associated with the park itself, and then you're making your way over to the trail. So we're trying to find just different scenarios of what kind of combinations of signs might be utilized. And then all persons trail. Again, getting you over to the parking lot, having you park. There's the parking lot across the street as well. And then moving you through and then getting you down to where you need directional signs and maybe interpretive signs. So just trying to identify where those might be. Not final locations, it's just trying to look at the potential types of signs that might be needed at different situations. So with that, maybe I'll just pause before we get into the design elements.
I have a question.
Sure.
So we obviously have a lot of we have so many signs in so many different locations. Is part of the work that you do, like you picked out 4 really good scenarios, and we have so many more than that, and so many intersections and so many potential places to say this way back to the parking lot. Do you go through with staff and and find all of those? Or do you provide direction and we do that? Like, I'm just trying to figure.
Yeah,
out-
we started with the 4. We'll probably have like 15 to 20 to get as many as possible. We won't every single one, but we'll have as many different scenarios as possible that with staff to say that, okay, we feel like we're comfortable with the guidance it's given.
Okay.
Yeah. We will also do a pilot area of, somewhere where, 25, 30 signs, different sign types. That'll be part of this as well. So you could try, that'll be sort of the testing
Mhm.
portion of it
Okay.
to be determined.
Thank you.
And because we have so many joint trails, I mean, even the samples that you use, like Horseshoe Gulch,
Yeah.
isn't just ours. Do we, but it's got our name on it and Summit County's.
Yeah.
So,
Keep going.
okay, we have a lot of them like that. Are we coordinating with the county to do this on ones that aren't strictly ours, that are jointly owned? I mean, are we working out a relationship that, so we get consistent, but then when we have a joint one, it's back to looking like it was before?
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Bobby. We are working with the county, and it's definitely a conversation that we'll continue to have as we go along. And you're right, we've got separate ones that we share, and then we have about 7 or 8 in-town ones that are town-only ones that we have a little bit more freedom and leeway. But yes, they'll definitely be included in the conversation. And, as we move forward, it's definitely, as we go forward, it's, talking about the budget and if they want to be involved and how that works out.
You'll see as we go through the design, we've tried to find areas, sort of portions of the sign where both logos, is it 1, is it 2, is it 3, that sort of thing. So we'll get to that in a moment.
Notice that the Forest Service isn't on here, and in the Golden Horseshoe, it's between those 3 entities, county, town, and the Forest Service. Is that?
Yeah, it may just not been part of the example.
Yeah, I agree with Bobby that the sort of collaboration between the town and county, I mean, this kind of goes back to a bunch of different things. For example, when we started talking about the concessionaires and how to kind of, geofence that, the idea that, I mean, I don't even know when I'm crossing from town to county, it's a very confusing thing. So it seems to me that it'd be extremely important to have consistency as broad as possible. And I realize that broad is really broad. But to me, it seems like if it is not consistent, then, it just becomes more confusing
Yeah.
rather than,
But and you'll see it in the designs, we've tried to call out areas where they can be shared. There are going to be points where there has to be a handshake between your system, say the forestry, just based on land ownership. So, but it's part of the information that we're trying to identify a place on the sign or one of the signs for.
Yeah, and sort of along the same lines, if I can, sorry. We get really far away, the master plan sort of identifies, you probably saw this, front country, mid country, back country. And it kind of gets from one to the other more quickly than you might imagine as it gets more remote. Have you guys had a conversation about tying those sort of like more far-flung directional, intersections and wayfinding tied back into sort of this very front country kiosk oriented stuff?
Yeah, I think, what we're working on, Matt, and our master plan goes hand in hand with those designations of the front and mid country. Because what you're alluding to is like back country, maybe we don't need the 4-foot blinking light sign saying, is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, I think so. And I do agree that probably the further away from, call it town that you get, maybe there's less obligation to sort of provide that wayfinding. And I think, if you're out there, you might already know where you are or have, more capability.
I think that'll go to the earlier answer I gave regarding the different scenarios. We can break them into those types of scenarios so that, okay, if you're in town and you need a lot of information,
Yeah.
it's all these, but if you're not, then it's really limited to, 2 or 3 things or whatever it might be. So that can be worked into all of this.
Yeah. And one other thing that before I forget, I like the comment about somebody said they wanted I've always been a proponent of sort of like, suggested routes. So I like that comment that somebody said, we want to know the 5 mile or the 10 mile or the 15 mile loop. And I don't know how you guys have worked that into identifying certain routes along the way, like breadcrumbs or whatever, but, I've always felt like that would be a huge benefit.
Yeah,
to
that's
people
something we
visiting.
would do with staff, and that might be one of the pilots.
Cool. Thanks.
Tie into Matt's comments, like one of the things that I didn't see, and I wasn't sure if it was part of the scope of work, but is there a place to guide users to an online map or to a, not necessarily a QR code, but for more information for loops, for detailed maps?
Yeah,
or-
you'll see that in a moment. Okay. So moving into the design portion, there's sort of two things before we get into the different design options. The first were the design consideration. So just as you were saying earlier, we recognize that sometimes it's going to say town of Breckenridge, sometimes it has to say Summit County. We understood that that was a piece of it. We also started to think about color, right? So color coding, like, are we color coding the trails? How does regulatory information it gets sort of complicated when you have too many colors, right? So you'll see colors as we go through this. We also, as we get into the design, we talked about, the signs on the trails and then signs at the nature preserve. And are they the same? Are they a little bit different? Are they completely different? You'll see that in the design as well. And then just the environment, right? Summertime, wintertime, the etiquette signs that would stay, the kiosks, trying to keep those and we're not saying tear out all the kiosks and start over. If there's opportunities to reuse them. The pictograms, incorporating those in, and just trying to create a level of hierarchy to the system. The other thing, this is what I was mentioning earlier, is when you think about the amount of information that's out there, besides just directional information and maybe events, what you're trying to tell people, this is where you have a lot of that clutter, right? You have all different signs telling people all of these different things. Is there a way to create a hierarchy to it and a color code to it, where you have on the left, obviously you have stop signs, reserved parking, things that people follow, right? Don't park here. We all know not to do that when the sign looks like that. Right. And then on the other end, you have the more friendly signs that are out there for more etiquette, and you place those to just inform people and sort of get it top of mind. But in between, you have these other areas where you don't want motorized bikes, or you need to have caution that it's downhill traffic. You may just want to go back to your master plan and talking about conservation and that sort of thing. You want to post a message about that. There's also rules that you need to post. There's certain things that you may want to put the Breck logo on it because you want to make sure that people feel like this is a important thing that the town is trying to tell you, right? And then maybe there's just courtesy, right? So we use purple for courtesy. But having, and you'll see as we go through this, just trying to get a standardized look and feel to those signs in a layout. So whenever someone says, hey, I need that sign, because Tony's going to get that request all the time, right? He has a layout to follow and he has an organization to it rather than it just being completely random. The other thing that's on there with the conserve is the border. So we also recognize from a design standpoint that you have to see these signs in the wintertime and you have to see them in the summertime, and the background that they sit on is different. So giving it a border helps it in both of those conditions. What you'll see as we go through the design options is that sometimes the signs will sit back. The sign is black, it's going to sit back in the environment. And if it's a color, it's going to pop. So that's part of something to look at from the design. Do you really want it to pop? Maybe that's too much. You don't want red signs all over the trails, right? But at certain times you may need it. And in this case, you have just like an accent, but you'll see that. So you'll see black, you'll see an accent, and then you'll see a full color sign. So this was option one. This has a very consistent feel in both the trail signage as well as the preserve, so that it doesn't change too much. We're basically using the same thing, and then just the color changes. You see on the trail identification sign that we added a little, not little, we added a pole next to it to give you the trail name. And then at the bottom of that, you have the supporting logos. You can do it there, and you could also do it at the kiosk. So we're giving a spot for that. I think on another one, we have it on the side, but we're sort of identifying an area of who the manager or owner of that trail is. And then you have what you can do on that trail. We're tending to limit it to 4. Could you go to 6? Yeah, but you don't want to have 8 to 10 listings of what you can and cannot do. So that's right as you enter the trail. Next to that, in some cases, sort of creating that portal of the entry is the kiosk. And that's where you start to get into more of the rules, what you can and cannot do, maybe a community board, a map of the area. That will be something we'll move into next as to what's the program for all the kiosks and what different combinations might be necessary. And then again, there's the sporting logos at the bottom. And then trying to get control of those rules and trail etiquette and regulatory signs, just stacking them on top of each other, trying to combine messages as well. Here's the QR code that's associated with the trail rules, but you could start to bring that into really any one of these signs, whether it's the informational signs or the directional signs. And then we have the existing etiquette signs, keeping that as part of the program as well. Here we're showing the trail directional as above, giving direction. Again, trying to also always have an orienting destination on that sign. My guess is you'll see on the other design options that there's more of a totem. My guess is that more like this sign, there's probably going to be some combination of both based on conditions, no matter what design option we choose. So this is the trails. And then here you can see more of a close-up of those. So this is the trailhead.
Why did you put the one set of signs with the arrow so far above the height of the nominal person there?
Yeah, so once you come out once it projects out like a flag, there's an ADA requirement that it can't be underneath a certain height. So if you go with a totem, you can come out probably about 4 inches from there. But that's about it. Once you go out beyond the 4 inches, it's got to get up for ADA requirements.
Thank you.
And snow.
Is there a reason? I guess I just have a question generally about how people typically use kiosks, because if we're having things you can't do, like e-bikes or horses or something, and you have it on the kiosk and then you have it again on the pole a few feet later, what's the point of having it in 2 places if we're trying to consolidate?
Yeah, they don't have to be the exact same message. I think the ones that are by the trail are really specific to that trail, and the ones that are on the kiosk are more general to the network itself. And you would break it apart that way. So you have general trail rules that are there, and then really specific at the point of contact.
That's an interesting thing for us to think about, because I don't know if we have too many. I can't think of too many areas where there'd be a kiosk that would incorporate an area where trails have different rules. You know, I don't know. We don't need to think about it now, but I'm not sure. I can't think of any off the top of my head where we would need that. I don't know. If we're just trying to make things as simple as possible, I think there's just an interesting question about what we want to use our kiosks for in order to not duplicate information right back to back.
Yeah, that's the next step, is to program what information has to go on here. Here you can see these also have, I think we'll see it on the other one. This is where you start to get bilingual information as well. The kiosk is another spot where bilingual information can go. In talking with the DEI committee, we agreed that directional signs for the most part are proper names, so that doesn't need to be bilingual. But when you get into information that it's a little bit more, you have to read like a paragraph, or you have to read some sentences, then that's where the bilingual information, more instructions or informational, that's where that bilingual would happen. whenever you do bilingual, you either have more signs or bigger signs, one or the other. And then this is, okay, so this is the trail, and then the difference would be at the preserve, you can see we just popped it with that little green color. It's not much of a change. And that was the purpose of sort of this end of the spectrum. We did add some enhancements to the base. What we talked about with the groups is that, is there a default system? And then is there sort of an enhanced system when you deem that that's appropriate? And you'll see that throughout the two options, mainly for the nature preserve.
Does that just indicate that it's even more special than a regular trail?
Yeah, and we've done that before on other trails where you have sort of a default throughout, but there's certain areas where you just want to bring it up a little bit, and that's what this was. And then this is that spectrum of messaging for this particular option. So we did a couple things here. One is we gave it a shape so that it's recognizable. And then we also gave it a border for that color, but the sign itself is black. And you'll see in some of the renderings how that sort of sits back a little bit more. This is option 2. So option 2, it was a new trailhead, but it was a larger post. We weren't running the text vertically in this, we had it horizontally. You can see ADA, we can come off that 4 inches. And then we had a field of the pictograms, and then on the side you would have the trail owners or managers that would sort of just wrap around the side, and it would sort of clip to it and give it an area for that when it's necessary. And again, with the kiosk, this one has a canopy on it. Again, we may look at this in the end and say, in certain cases, we want to keep exactly what we have and we want to have it, but we do want to have an alternate where a canopy or a roof is appropriate at special spots. That could be a decision as we move along. The rule sign is more stacked, and then we're just using an accent of color to distinguish between, stop, caution, and some of the other headers that we had previously. And then the trail directional is just sort of more standard totem with either a pictogram or a name. We'll zoom in on this, giving you direction to adjacent destinations.
Hey, John, and I think we've talked about this earlier, but I did want to mention that we do have 7 kiosks in town that we want to do that are all on town property. So just, considering we could have a different, look and feel for a kiosk as a possibility, or, still use a consistent one as well, as I'm sure.
Is your intention, though, there was mention of reusing these kiosks and where they already exist in some places? So is it sort of the base intention is to try to reuse the ones that are already existing if they're in good shape, or?
Good question, Dave, but we would not. We would start from scratch from the ones that we want to redo. Yep.
We gave the option of reusing them just as if that's what they want to do. I think what the key to the kiosks is, one is maybe having that eye on there so people see from a distance, oh, that's where I go to get information. And then, I think different kiosks in different locations, you're going to have to start to make decisions as to what information goes where, what's appropriate. I don't think it's a one size fits all, that this is the information we put on every kiosk and then we're done. I think you're going to have 3 or 4 or 5 different scenarios of the type of information that's appropriate at, especially between just the trail network and the preserve itself. It's going to be a little bit different. So here we were trying to stack it. And again, this is the trail. And then this would be the preserve where we just changed the color. And then this is the spectrum of messaging. So in this case, we're just using that header to give a little bit of a pop of color for the signs. And option 3, So this is a totally new system. There wasn't any reuse of the kiosks or anything. There wasn't any reuse of the poles at the trailheads either. So this was just take everything out. And again, we tried to sort of do it across the way. But the name of the trail and then the pictograms, the kiosk. This one we added sort of side panels. We found that that is helpful for some clients where certain places need additional information. So you, in this case, showing an interpretive panel, you could have sort of just the center version, and then you could have this triple version where maybe there's a certain spot that needs more info. That general concept can be applied to any of these options. And then with the rule and etiquette signs, just using color, like really just getting, if you feel like it's really important, getting it to pop. So at all these signs, again, this is where you could start to, there's a QR code there. You could start to put a QR code on that sign. You could even do it on the directional signs. So this is the trail on this one, and then this would be the nature preserve where we're bringing in stone. So again, it's just really more of an idea of an enhanced version of it for certain areas.
And is it premature to have any guesstimate as far as the price differential for these three options?
They're not that, I mean, as soon as you start adding the base, that's always going to add price, but there's not a huge difference between these. We tried to keep them as simple as possible, and it's really about the graphics of it, right? So it's a simple sign. It's really about the graphics because you have so many signs that if you start to do something too ornamental or, too many different shapes and the maintenance of it, we're trying to get it into a manageable system. I mean, you can even look at the size of the poles. They're basically the same width, two different widths, right? And that's it. It's just a matter of length for that particular pole. So trying to make it a system as you're designing the parts of it as well. Again, here you see the spectrum message, but here we're using color. Yeah, we're making the signs bright. I have better photo renderings in my corrupted file, by the way. So
I
this
really
was
like this part though, where you actually put the.
yeah, so this is that wall of signs. And then we sort of moved the doggy sign, but this is sort of the idea of what you would get there. So you would have the trailhead ID that you would see from a distance, the kiosk, and then when you take a couple steps in, and we talked to Duke and Tony about this. We originally had it farther back. We've moved it up closer so people don't get too far down and say, oh, I didn't realize I can't walk my dog, like that sort of thing. So that's going to be more of a guideline, and then looking at it on a place for place basis. But it's also, once you get into it, you may need that again somewhere else. So it's not just limited to, the entry point. It is just for our photo renderings. This was the second option. So you can see that etiquette sign, with just that little border, and it sits back. This gets a little bit more of a pop that tells you there's a caution or a don't. Not to do something, stop. And then this gets really colorful, right? So you sort of have to make that decision as to, and that's what we want to hear, like, oh no, that's too much color. That's a valid point for this project. This was up by the nature preserve, that back way in. So you have all of these signs. This is a good, telling you all different things, sometimes repeating itself. The pictograms are just really, really tiny, and there's so many of them. So this is just trying to get that under control into all that information, getting it up as you walk in and telling you what you can and cannot do. Having the ID sign right at the entrance that you could see, because we saw a lot of people come off the Forestry Trail there. There's like a kiosk, and then we watched them like they weren't sure which way to go. You need to be able to see. I think the trailhead's moving right over. That'll be a little bit better, but you'll have sort of an identifier at that point. And here you can see again the trailhead.
We do know there's no dogs. The sign talks about leashing your dog.
That was it. My other one has a really cool one by the nature preserve where there's hardly a sign to see. There's a sign in the spot when you come out by the Nordic Center and you look over to the trail that brings you back to the preserve, and there's nothing, you can't, there's a sign there, but you can't see it. And these pop a little bit. It gives you, I think you're not trying to, especially with the trailhead signs, I don't think we're trying to create like a hot pink beacon for people to find. I think what we're trying to do is just create a node or, an understanding that, oh, that's where I should go. But I think if you look at that Nordic one from the parking lot, there's no indication when Alex and I went out there that you could see where that trailhead, where you're supposed to walk over to it. This is the type of thing that might just give you enough of a cue to get over. But again, it doesn't have to be, a really brightly colored element in order to do that. That'll take any questions.
Thanks, John.
Yep.
So I think this conversation's really important. I think there's some bigger, broader considerations and more granular considerations. So I just wanted to potentially frame the dialogue a little bit by prompting a few more specific questions. And some of these have gotten answered to some degree, but I thought of, are these options working to solve our signage clutter and consistency problem? Do we need to see better consolidation of information? How do we think about signage distribution? So John spoke to like the threshold people encounter of information where they can get overwhelmed. So how do we maintain like be cognizant of that at trailheads? Are these options appropriate for both summer and winter? How do we think about color? Do we want signage to be more discreet, blending into the natural environment, or do we want to use colors that stand out? Are these working well in terms of capturing our joint management with Summit County and the Forest Service? How do we think about permanent components and then elements that need to be updated routinely? And then is there anything missing? So those were just, I'm sure there's even more than that, but I thought that could help guide us a bit and hopefully give you good information. But I was going to pick on Chris to kick us off.
Thanks, Nikki.
And this can be a dialogue, obviously, with
Right.
John and staff. It's
Yeah.
not like we have to go one at a time by any means.
And as far as guiding principles for Council, Jay, what would be the best kind of outcome of this conversation? Are they looking for detail on like colors and schemes, or is it more kind of a top line? Are we meeting the mark as far as the waypoint guidance that we're looking to get out of this? Because I'm sure we can go down that rabbit hole of tones of colors or whatever else, but kind of curious what you think.
I think that the broader we can go, the better. And I think that right now, I'd be curious to hear your comments about, but on broadly, not, well, I think we should go with a lime green instead of a forest green.
Right.
That I think we can save for down the road.
Okay.
In the other presentation, there's a QR code that we have set up a design survey for feedback. So I'm not sure if how that will get distributed out, but that's another way to get their comments as well. It's not a vote. We don't vote on design.
Right.
We just get comments and then we figure out what works.
Sorry, before you kick it off, Chris, I was going to say Tony and Duke, their consideration about installation and management is really important. So I think we want to hear that. Tony, as it comes up routinely, like please chime in on those considerations. Sorry.
No, it's okay. I tried to hand it off to Jay. That didn't work either. So here we go. Gonna have to start with just kind of a personal point of view. I think for me, as we went into this project, the biggest concern I had was over signing and kind of over programming the trailheads and trying to do too much. But it seems like in some of the instances that seems to have been solved for. I lean towards option number one, and kind of my reasons behind kind of leaning into that was priorities for me are that it reflects the space that it's sitting in, which is nature. And I think 2 and 3 for me get a little busy and programmed and feel a little more urban and a little less natural environment. So I do like the tall signage post that has kind of the burned in name of the trail. Feels appropriate in the setting. I also liked in one, the dog-eared signage where you kind of have the folded corner on one side. I think that speaks to what we're trying to get to as far as what the points are at a high line. And I like the black background on that one myself, because again, for me, I hope we can get the point across on everything that we're trying to communicate without interrupting kind of the higher level natural setting that we're looking to encounter in this. So initially, that's kind of, as far as the aesthetics, I kind of go towards one. As far as the simplicity of it, I go towards one. There's details from the other two that I do like, as far as like Matt was asking about, kind of we've never really had a lot of information on how long it takes to get mileage wise from one trail to the next trail or something like that. But seeing it in Europe, it always seems like it's almost backwards, like where you're walking backwards on your mileage or something like that. So you definitely need to explain it if we change that up and add that to the mix. But overall, I'd say that's kind of where I'm at on one, and there's nothing really missing that I would be looking for. I'd be curious if we can even pull back a little bit more on everything that needs to be communicated in the signage. That'd be mine.
Start.
Good start.
Yeah, I think the amount of signage at any given point, whether it's at the trailhead or at a junction or an intersection, that's going to be a situation by we're going to give you the guidelines of here's the best practice, but ultimately you're going to be choosing, holding people back. No, I need this, I need this, I need this. And you have to sort of come to a reality of what is really needed at that spot to control the information. So yes, there will be guidelines for it, but every situation is going to have to be looked at as you sort of roll it out.
And I guess that you bring up the thing I was thinking about as far as what our ultimate handoff with this project will be. Town staff will be given kind of an overall guideline. So as we add trails and things change down the road, or if we get something that doesn't quite fit the bill of everything we've done in the past, that they have some kind of a structure.
Yeah, there will be plenty in there that the odd thing that comes up, there will be a layout that it could fit into.
Thank you.
I'd always help Tony out anyway, so.
Tony, do you actually want to it might help us if you spoke sooner than later about what you see with install and maintenance?
Yeah, thanks, Nikki. Thank you, John, for all this. Appreciate it. It's a lot, and it's great to think about it. And even looking at it tonight for the 5th or 6th time, new things come up. But I think one of the main things I struggle with is the trail identification, and it's the double post. And I struggle with that, knowing that we have over 500 and something posts in our system. And I like the trail name on the one post. I think that looks great, but just putting an 8x8 post in the ground next to 500 of these, it seems a little silly to me. And I do think the single post will be able to provide that.
So maybe if we came up with a way of doing this with a double post and a single post way, so that the double post is where you really have a primer, like I think this is one of them. You really need to identify it, but then there's a single post where it's just like, this is just it's a way in, but I don't need to see it from across the parking lot.
Yeah, and I like that.
And I think that's what we're trying to get at with a lot of the guidelines. It's like identify situations so you have enough of the ingredients when something comes up to go, okay, I can use this instead of that.
Yeah.
It's not a one size fits all.
Goes to Matt's point about our management zones, and like potentially that would follow suit with front country versus our mid and back country. So
I think that's great. I think just having some guidance or options with that. And then I get the hierarchy and not having too much information up front, but I'm a little concerned about e-bike use on some of our trails, and to have an e-bike sign 15 feet into the trail, and then that person's going to turn their 50-pound bike around and turn back, or entering Cucumber Gulch and 15 feet down the trail, there's somebody with a dog on a leash and they read, oh, I'm not supposed to have dogs. And what if somebody drives by and they're like, oh, Tony just saw somebody with a dog in the gulch. And,
Yeah.
so I don't know how we do it, but I get the hierarchy and not having too much information up front, but I think balancing that in a way would be helpful. And I think those are my two kind of major concerns of how we kind of move forward with that. But in the colors and the design, I can go either way, and I'm not an expert on those.
Think about how huge you'll get hauling 8x8 posts all over the place.
Not me. Yes.
What are you thinking over there? I'm mixing up the order.
Yeah, I thought it was supposed to go last.
Yeah, nope, not tonight.
I appreciate all the work that you put into this, John. I think this is always tough to try to, spend a couple days here and then go back and formulate something that's gonna make the community jump up and go, yes, that's it. We want this. And I really enjoy the discussion and the questions that you have brought up through this of going, well, what is important? What is the loudness? What's the tone? What's the volume we want to talk with through the signs? And I think that's really good things for this commission to discuss and really kind of find out where we stand on that. To a certain extent, I feel like we're picking out the drapes before figuring out where the foundation's going. I'm concerned that whichever one of those three is, there's not enough spectrum for us to really look at. There's nothing really pushing the envelope on either side of either minimalist or, more. And that really is challenging us to really look at some of those ideas that are out there in the world, in the tourist economy, in the tourist regions that are unorthodox. And I think that was my disappointment, was that, all three of these are beautiful and they're well, but I think at this stage of the infancy of this project, I would prefer not to be talking about what color spectrum we're working on, but more larger on a macro level of going, what if we did a audio button that you push and it tells you all the rules, or just like insane things that just really need to be brought out and fleshed out, not because we're going to adopt it how it is, like how it's presented, but maybe there's something in there that we can grasp. And the really best practices that you've seen across the globe there. And I feel like there's got to be more out there than the options 1, 2, and 3, as far as how closely aligned all three are, where I would personally love to see something much further to the right, much further to the left, and just so that we can have an understanding of what we have. Some of that, is, really, I encourage you on your stakeholder meetings to bring in the county, bring in the Forest Service if you can. I think these are partners that we really need to have full buy-in on. And a lot of the survey stuff that you showed was mentioned maps. Like, what does it look like to have a focused in map on further in on the trail connections? Are there different methodologies? Are there more effective methodologies that we should consider? These are things that I just really, I guess I just wonder, and maybe this is all a foregone conclusion going, from you, John, going, no, I know I've gone through all this and this is not applicable to you. And so this is why.
I think what you have to balance it with is Tony's comment where he doesn't even want to do a second poll. All the way on that side. And you're all the way on the other side. And these comments are really good. And what we wanted to bring up issues that we thought were important within the designs to hear back so that we have a little bit guidance and we can take that giant step. But some of that does rely on the issues that we brought up that are with like options within options of this, but we can go far. But I think we'll have to at some point come into the middle of that.
And I think that, I guess that's where I'm at, is that at this point, I feel like this is still a brainstorming session that we're so we're early in the project where it's like,
Exactly.
Maybe, what are ways of being super minimalist and what are ways of over-informing and what's in between and what does that spectrum look like? I'm repeating myself to a certain extent, but, and I think one of the things that I've heard the most is how to reduce the clutter. And I think that we started addressing it, and there's problems with that of going, the no signs have to be,
Yeah.
where do we put those? And that is, and I'd love to keep flushing that out and to see where that is. And just, yeah. And I guess lastly is, when we do kind of run with that, I would love to see what the majority of our signage is not at the trailheads. It is at intersections, and to try to provide a little bit more insights into what those look like. When we do get into specifics, I'll tell you that I think there's certain things that, including the directional trails that have the big flags on them that just don't feel subtle enough for our community. I think they do feel a little bit more urban versus rural, and to continue with that larger post, I think, the singular larger post could have a lot more traction. I do love that the fact that you're interested in keeping that, you're embracing the etiquette signs. I think that's something that we've heard loud and clear from our community, that those are effective, and they're attention grabbing. So I appreciate that.
Yep.
Kristen, how about you?
Well, I don't know where to start. So I do think, I really resonate with a lot of your comments on seeing some of these wordy, like the ones in the back that are kind of more about the rules and the etiquette. I would love to see an option that's more minimal than that. Like, I think some of that verbiage, it's nice to be polite, and maybe some of that belongs in the kiosk when you have more time to read and you're trying to get all the information that you can. But when it comes to a smaller trail entrance point, I don't really want to see full sentences. I would love to see an option that's just like, no dogs, no bikes, or whatever it is, because I think we're just trying to make things simpler. I think some of these are really pretty, but I think that the more wordy versions to me feel either more close to town and or in the kiosks. And then when we're just talking about a smaller entrance to our trail system, I think seeing a more minimalist option would be good. I wasn't thinking about Tony and his team when we were thinking about double posts, but I do really like the big etched in signage. I think right now, something that I didn't really realize until I saw your options is that all of our trail names are the exact same size as every other icon on the post. And I think the primary thing you need to know is, where are you? And so I like the idea of having, it's at least in the front country. And I think that's a really good point that Matt brought up, that, we should be adding to the conversation how this changes as you go from front to mid to back, because front country, I would really love to see a big sign. It's like, you've reached Toad Alley. Like, that's the first thing you need to know. And all of the regulations are secondary to that. But the further you get back into the back country, obviously we don't want to see a huge post or make Joel carry that big post out there. I also don't, I think just if we are going to get specific, I think doing this kind of option where you add one and then keep them, I just think it looks kind of messy, like they don't really match. And so I kind of do like the idea of thinking about maybe doing one bigger post and having maybe having the name on one side and the regulations on you know, the next side or something. But those are my initial thoughts. I do think with the kiosk, you know, having a conversation about like the broader map of the area and then a zoom in of where you are, I think is probably the primary reason I would ever go up to a kiosk, is to orient myself about where I am. And so I want to make sure that doesn't get lost. It seems like that's incorporated, and we have a lot of thinking to do on how to redo our maps and what happens when we get a new trail and how expensive that all is. Totally get that. But I think that's kind of the primary reason I go to visit a kiosk, is to understand where I am and then rely on those smaller posts for wayfinding. And obviously those regulations don't really need to be there once you've kind
I
of.
didn't put it in the presentation, but when we were out there, every time I saw someone reading the kiosk, I took a picture of them, and I was just going to put it in the
Why are you
presentation.
here?
No, but I mean, because we get a comment all the time, like people don't read maps, and that's not true. I see people reading maps all the time, and I always like to put that in the presentation. And oh, there was like 5 people out there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the wayfinding, getting to a big parking lot and being like, where am I? What are my options? What loops can I do? That's why people visit a kiosk. So I think we need to keep that in mind. The final thing, which, you know, is just more of a, we haven't really talked about like how many Chantilly's there are and all the like too many naming of the trails and the hubs that we have, because I think that's another conversation I'd like to have, not tonight, but in general, of if we're talking about back to the gondola, that's really obvious, but back to B&B Trailhead is less obvious. If you started on the other side of the road, you might not know that you were at B&B Trailhead. Like, we might want to think about naming areas in a better way, so that they know that coming back to that like that parking lot maybe should be called something else, or I don't know. So just thinking about how to, the closer you get to a starting point, I like the idea, at least in the front country, of saying this way is the fastest way back to town. This way is the fastest way back to B&B lot. But understanding what to even call that, I think, is a conversation.
And this is really your opportunity to do it, because you're going to roll out these elements that you need to put that on there, whether it's the map or a
Yeah.
sign or whatever it might be.
What are you thinking, David?
Oh, wow. It's my turn already.
Mm.
So what Jay said really resonated with me. I did. And I think where I get a little lost is that we weren't involved in a lot of the pre-conversation. So, you know, how this is all going to work through, or at least I wasn't, or I blacked out. But maybe something that would help me understand is the versions of this, like what stage where we are at right now and how many more stages we get to, because I think if we're in kind of the brainstorming session, like Jay mentioned, I know the hard part is when you start, the minute you put something with a typeface and a color and you design it, it immediately looks, if you can say, oh, these are conceptual, people start thinking this is exactly the color, this is the typeface, you know, this is done. So I don't know if that's where you see this going in advance of the stakeholdering process, if there is that, you know, that realm where people who you do speak to in that process would give you enough feedback or input that you might come back and actually say, you know what, I don't like the 4x4 post at all. I want to come up with something that's completely different. Is that kind of?
Yeah, so we're this is the first design
Yeah.
concepts that we've presented. So
Okay.
there wasn't, other than maybe some internal meetings that we
Sure.
had, and we made some adjustments from that. So what we typically would do is take all the feedback we get over today and tomorrow from everybody and come back with an option 4. But that option 4 sometimes, and I think just based on Jay's comments, is we may have like a 4A and a 4B and say, okay, here's what we heard from everybody, the positive and negative things that they wanted to see. Here's option 4A, and this is sort of the wow one for Jay. And then there's probably a 4B, and say, okay, but if we had to step it back, sorry for Tony, this is what it would be for that. And there's basically 2. They're not going to be completely different, but there's going to be differences between them that say, okay, this is a wow one. It's maybe more expensive, whatever it might be. And then here's another version of that based on all the things that we heard from the stakeholders, because there are things that people are going to rule out already. And there's things that people are going to gravitate towards. So we are going to get a little bit of the pros and cons of different versions. It never happens where people go, oh, option one, we're done. That doesn't ever happen. It's always, we just take as many comments as we can and come back with that version. And that 4A, 4B is a very common thing that we do. And in this case, I think we would just push it in different ways.
So when you started off on this process, I know you did the survey, which you showed the results of. There were conversations, obviously, with staff. Did you have person-to-person conversations?
Yeah, with stakeholders. We had 3 days of meetings, yeah.
Okay, so that was town council, staff, who else was?
DEI committee, trail users.
Yeah, and that was like right when this started off.
Yeah, that was our first
Okay.
step basically was to meet with those different groups. So that's where a lot of this came, the things that we're talking about, bilingual, leave no trace, like all of those things. The etiquette was like the #1 conversation in the trail. And I shouldn't say etiquette, I should say the rules and regulatory and etiquette signs. That was like the number. That's why it's so heavy in that, because with the trail users, that's all for an hour, that's all they talked about.
Right. Because I noticed in the survey, I initially looked at the people who it was agree and very strongly agree that the system was easy to use, and it was like 75% or something. And then you go back and you look at the amount of use of that group, and I'm assuming it's the same.
Mhm.
It's the same universe. The people who don't use the trails very often is a pretty tiny amount. So that sort of tells me a little bit more of the story, why that number was 75%. Those of us who are using the trails a lot are very used to.
The point of good signage is to encourage people to don't use it, to use it, so.
Right. So I think for me, at least, I think what I would love to see is more what Jay's talking about, which is this feels a lot of like 1A, 1B, 1C, because we are going off of existing posts. And I think that's okay. But I would love to see something that really does push the envelope a little bit, because what we're seeing even here, I think you've even heard that we want to even potentially pull back a little bit more. And I think you'll probably see a spectrum of things on this board alone, and probably the same with the folks in the stakeholdering group.
Yeah, I think that's why the options are the way they are, because the guidance was to just reuse what's out there,
Right.
whether it's that totem and the kiosk. And that's why we used that. And then knowing that that was sort of the guidance, jumping far from that probably wouldn't have been a good idea, but maybe it should have been an idea.
Right. So I think that's maybe something that could be done to sort of express how you might address the differences in opinion, whether it's among council or stakeholders or actual trail users, for them to be able to see that, particularly around the rules and regulation signs. I agree with Kristen that there's probably a way to just be more direct. I think one of our challenges is if we are going to be bilingual on these signs, I think the more text, the more challenged we're going to be trying to translate that text, which is why I really liked the pictograms, because they're universal for the most part. But I do think just saying, no dogs is much easier to translate. There was a sign at the rec center a number of years ago that I used to just kind of chuckle at. It was right as you were about to cross a running track indoors, and there was a sign. It was a full 2 sentences on how to look both ways. Caution, but you were about to cross, and it was just kind of funny that it just should have said two-way traffic, which I think does now. But the original one was kind of like, wow, you're going to stop and read before you actually cross. Probably not. One of the ideas that I think might be nice in your in your mock-ups, and I think Jay may have alluded to it, is if we could see the use of, once you're in the guts of a trail where there's an actual intersection, to see the current sign and then see what your recommended sign would be, and probably from a couple of distances, and not focusing so much about what's on it, but recognizing that in some of these cases, especially where you see a lot of lodgepole, they're very easy to miss because the current ones are the same color almost as a lot of the flora and fauna around you, and people can just go right by them and they might miss them, which is one reason I kind of am drawn to the brighter use of colors for important, or just a color for important elements of the actual trail system. I don't know that differentiating between the signs really buys us anything, except it kind of is maybe inside our own bubble that, you know, green is conserved, purple is welcome, etc. But maybe a small element on those trail signs and those posts will tell me that this is a guidepost. I can stop by this guidepost and I'll know where I'm going. So that feels good to me. I like that on option one, but I really liked in your scenarios how potentially what you might be able to do in keeping the posts that exist, so we don't have to change out so many, is if you did either have something that was routed down the side, so you could have that 4-inch sign with the trail name off down the side of it. It's a way to maybe update the existing posts without replacing them, or put a colored cap on top that had some of those elements in it. And that way, if we're focusing on entrances like this, we can be a little bit more, I don't know, bougie, I guess, for lack of a better word. And then when we're inside the trails system where there's a ton of posts, we're limiting the amount of work that it would take to actually replace so many of those, but there's some consistency that you can bring in some of those elements. But I think it'd be nice to see that, to see what that distance looks like, and see how you guys are approaching what it is like to be in those trails in the winter and in the summer, and how you can avoid people missing them. I would love to see some of the more, you know, the more descriptive rules on the kiosks. And if we have something that has a lot of rules, let's just focus on maybe one sign versus having several. I worry that what would happen is, especially around Cucumber, where we've got a lot of different rules, you would end up having to have 3 or 4 of those signs. So that to me is something that could probably come out. I don't have a problem with the pictograms personally. I think if you have more, if people are stopping or if they're continuing to walk by, I think if you stop and look and you do have, say, no e-bikes, no dogs, hikers only, or whatever it might be, that's really where they ought to be. And it helps people understand, you know, what the rules of the next trail is that they're heading off to. I will say that the ski area designations, this part just has bothered me. It's a challenge. I don't know how to get around it, but if you're a hiker or you're a biker or you're a dog walker or skier or what have you, intermediate, expert, and easy mean different things to different people. And the one thing that I would love to see us explore is trail profile, just a simple, I've seen this on some other trail systems where they use kind of an indicator, like a line graph that shows that you are going to be climbing.
Yeah.
Or it's maybe just a rounded one where the trail is just going to kind of undulate up and down. And so it gives somebody the idea that, yes, it's green because it is solid, you know, it's very easy to walk on. There aren't a lot of technical features on it, but it might also be a 500-foot elevation gain. And so I don't want to bring my 5-year-old on that walk. So I don't know how to get around it, but I would.
That was mentioned in our stakeholder meetings, and I guess we thought that was going to be part of a kiosk, but we can look at bringing it closer to the entry point.
Yeah, I'm thinking in an intersection, if I'm deciding whether to go on Turk's Trail or B&B, that's an example of something that is much more technical on a trail called Turk's versus the B&B trail, which is much more of a walking
Yeah.
trail to me. So that's something I'd love to try to figure out how we address. I'm not quite sure of that. I really did like the idea of reusing the kiosks, but just to give you, I'm trying to save you. I know you're, not trying to close your rings on your watch every day. And
I think we were just trying to make it for our partners, right?
Yeah.
Here we are going off in this adventure, but let's not forget, we have our partners and we want them to come with us.
Yeah.
Right?
well, I'm hoping that in the stakeholder group that it would go to the Golden Horseshoe group, for example, because I think the Forest Service could probably add some. Certainly, we want the county to buy in on this, so the users don't really care when they're crossing into county or Forest Service or town. They just want to be able to get to where they're going, right? So that was sort of my thought on that. I think I covered the limits on that, the reusing, the Breck logo elements. I think, I'm partial to those, but I also think that if they are in town, that's great. But if it's joint, like here, Toad Alley makes sense. But if you're at the Golden Horseshoe, that's obviously those little design elements would probably make somebody from the county a little anxious. I don't know who those people are though. Let's see, generally, I think you've done a nice job trying to address, the challenges, but I think you're going to find that there's going to be a lot of different needs, which is why in that first slide that you showed all the different signs, some of these I know the story behind. Somebody has harassed staff and said, we need a sign here. And they're like, okay, we're going to try to calm this person down and we'll put a sign up. And there's no guideline for it. So whatever you guys provide to staff should be real easy for them to have some flexibility on, providing typeface guidelines.
Yeah, all
color
that'll be included.
guidelines, all that.
Wherever we land, that'll.
Yeah,
be in
so
there.
the manufacturing of that doesn't lend people, to maybe freelance and say, oh, nice little footprints would be cool here. It's just
Right.
kind of being consistent would be important. And I'm sure you guys are pros. You're going to do something like that. But I would love to see a really good design standard book that both the county and the town and even the Forest Service had access to. Because at the end of the day, while the Forest Service is using Carcinite, when we're getting into their system, they may be willing to at least pull in some of the things that if, the county and the town are in strong agreement on some of those elements, bring some of those in and offer the Forest Service to put some of those items on their Carcinite signs. And they're small, it's a challenge, but whether it's QR codes, all those things that could just help the end user. So I think that's it for me.
Cool. Bobby, what are you thinking?
On the Forest Service thing, that's federal government. They probably have next to no ability to go beyond what the regulation says on their signage. I'm just having worked for the federal government. I know how hard that is. I had a question for you about this, how fast or frequently the state of the art in the sign world changes. I mean, are the kind of things that you've proposed here what the standard is now in terms of design and setups and stuff? Is it a very incremental change over years, or in 5 years, no matter what we pick, it's going to look old?
Well, part of that's material. So material is always changing to a certain degree, mainly for anything that's on the graphics, with the wood poles or the wood poles, but anything that you see that's graphic, whether it's a pictogram or the messaging for the regulatory signs or that sort of thing. And I have examples of different levels of material. They have different cost points. with them, but that's really where things start to get longer warranties. You know, if you're going to do it out of vinyl and it's going to be less expensive, but you're going to get a 2 or 3 year warranty, or you're going to do a powder coated graphic and now you're going to start to get like a 10 or 12-year warranty. That's really where you see the change. I mean, how much technology you bring into this? I mean, we have park systems where we're doing like e-paper, which is like a Kindle for their pavilions so that they don't have to go out there with paper and update things all the time. I mean, can you start to do that on the kiosks, you know, and have a solar panel on your kiosk? You certainly could start to look at that. How much that's going to work in the winter, I don't know how much it's going to work when it's doesn't, you know, a spot that doesn't get a lot of sun. But that's a digital component that's not necessarily flashy, right? It's black and white. You could put graphics on it. You can, instead of people pinning stuff up, that's a way around that. So the QR codes are funny because before the pandemic, people didn't want to use them. And then as soon as a restaurant started to use them, it became normal, you know? So that's another thing. But I mean, we can look at other elements, but it's really materials, the thing.
Yeah, I was just wondering about the comments in terms of trying to be a little more innovative, a little more out there. Is this just an industry that's not out there? It's pretty staid or not? I don't know. I'm just asking the question.
It's an industry and it's managers that they have to maintain the system, you know, and maintaining the amount of signage that you're going to have on the trails. You have to keep that in mind.
Mhm.
You know, it's not a park. It's not a 3-acre park where you're putting up 17 signs and it's going to look really cool. And you only have to maintain 17 signs. You have hundreds of signs. So there is a balance there between materials and consistency and being able to get something quickly and, you know, something that's, you know, really out there on the edge, whether that's technology driven or material driven or whatever it might be.
And one thing that we hadn't really talked about was any kind of contact information. Like, I know I'm often told, if I see a tree is down, let me know. I would have your phone numbers, but my buddies who are out there hiking, they wouldn't know who to call. Is that something we ought to consider in terms of information that somebody could take even just a picture of when they're going on a trail they're not familiar with, and then would know who to call, especially when there's 2 or 3 partners?
And how often do you post it? I mean, the other thing,
Yeah.
we don't have it on here, and we probably should have, was like emergency contact numbers,
Right.
you know?
911, but.
Yeah, but
No, but no, if you have, we have projects where there's emergency locators where there's a, you know, 2 or 3 digit N556. And that gives people, that goes back to the emergency system so that they know where they are
Right.
on the trail.
I think, yeah, that's definitely a little more granular question, but just to help you out, Bobby, we have developed that on our website now where people can actually locate GPS it on a trail if it's a tree down, but you know, you could have that QR code, you know, concerns, questions, something out of the ordinary, you could scan that and that would take you to our website, then that person would be able to.
And is that part of the Be Like Breck app?
It's not separate.
It's our OST website.
Right, which is great when you're on a computer.
Right, but having that information displayed on the kiosk, if that is something, which would be great, like, you know, poop bags are out. There you go.
Yeah, you found them. They're all right there. And one of the things that I'm concerned about is all the stuff at the trailhead. I think we can come to agreement on what information needs to be there. But where I get lost is when I get out in the far away from the kiosk and suddenly there's a V in the road. And there's not anything there that tells me one way or the other. And I know we had talked at one point about a symbol. This is the purple trail, or this is the green trail, or this is a whatever trail. So you don't have a lot of verbiage necessarily, but you have something that says, this is the way you were following when you started. This is taking you somewhere else, and it's a different color. So the wayfinding past the first quarter mile or wherever the first split in the trail goes is pretty important.
Yeah, we talked about color coding, and you have so many trails that the color coding would be really difficult. Because to be honest with you, general rule of color coding is once you get beyond 4 colors, then you're like, is it dark blue? Is it light blue? Is it
Right.
purple? Is it violet? You know,
Well,
and
then-
color coding really works it really works when you can coat the environment. So when you go into a garage and they can paint the wall, or you get out at a hospital and the whole elevator bank is purple, that's when it really works. But it's been shown that color coding in natural and urban environments, people just don't pick it up
Yeah.
as much. And again, I think it was just the number of trails and colors would be difficult.
The questions I had was, at those trail junctions, could you have a "You Are Here" trail map there? And you could do, like Dave said, maybe have even a little profile attached to that for the trails where it's going to.
Right. And that, I think something same along those lines and help you with, your loops, or we have those You Are Here maps more in the front country. And then potentially you have the purple hiking friendly loop. Like maybe you started your hike out and now you're a little bit in and now you see this You Are Here map and you're like, oh, I didn't even know there was a purple friendly loop. Let's take that, and then maybe then that purple loop would have just that purple identification for that loop, and having some trail profiles for that suggested loop or something at those kind of front country
I
intersections.
mean, it's part of design development where, like I showed you, like 5 or 6 sign types, you're going to have 20, 30 different sign types as part of this project. Once we sort of settle on, okay, this is a general direction, then the next step besides that option 4A and B, really a step beyond that is design development, where you're saying, okay, this is the basis for design. We've settled on that. Now I need to apply it to every type of sign that's necessary. So you're going to ultimately have a manual that's got 20, 25, 30 different types of signs besides messaging. And that's where those smaller, I'm sure we would have a smaller kiosk, and then we would give guidelines as to, oh, that is something that could appear deeper in it. We just started out first to get some of the conversation going, and then you expand it out to all the different sign types that are necessary. But you have to sort of land on you don't do schematic design across 30 sign types. You do it across 5, land on it, and then spread it.
And as far as using the ski logos, green, blue, black, that is much more informative to me than the ones that we sometimes see that are a white diamond. I mean, I've seen that on some of our signs, and that doesn't tell me anything. Most people can get the idea that green is a lot easier than black, because so many of the people who use our trails also are skiing or snowboarding or snowshoeing or whatever. And they see the ski industry logos, signage that tells you something about how hard that run is. And whether or not we do that, I think at least gives everybody a general idea. I like the idea of the map that shows the ups and downs, that shows how much elevation gain you're going to have over a 5 mile or 2 mile or whatever. That's very granular and very helpful for people who really know what they're looking at. But a green dot tells a lot of people, oh, I can probably do this. This is pretty easy. Whereas a black diamond would say to somebody who's got a little kid and hasn't hiked hardly at all, I don't think I want this.
Well, I think that gets, Bobby, to your point about like how sophisticated is signage. I mean, when you go abroad, there are really sophisticated, it's hard because we have so many different apps in Colorado that map to different types of trails depending on what kind of user you are. And then we have our own map system, which is getting much more advanced. And I'd be interested in tying this to something online. I mean, you go to Austria and everyone uses the same website for the trails, and it gets to the point of how difficult something is, because you can see the elevation and you can see how far it is, and you can see that it's green, and you can see that it's open. I think the future is, we need to be as clear as possible to make sure that we're being equitable for people who don't have access to technology. But I also think we can't not have the conversation of how we're tying this to technology, because that is in most cases, I would say, how people are navigating the trail system. It's how I navigate the trail system. Even when I'm lost in Breckenridge, I'll pull up All Trails or Mountain Bike Project and be like, where the heck am I now?
Main Street.
I'm on Chantilly. And so, yeah, so I do think, like, sorry, I'm sure you have more to say, but I just wanted to say that I think that, it's gonna be really hard to talk about difficulty of trails beyond the pretty well-known ski area, blue, green, black. And because when you get into elevation and you get into mileage and everything, that's what you look for online, I think. So, anyway.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. That was really my thing. I'm more in favor of the little pictograms, the little logos, not a lot of words. I'm skeptical that being pleasant is going to get anybody to do something they don't want to do. And I showed my husband some of these, and the ones that said, please pick up after your dog, he laughed. Now, he would be like your tourist that doesn't know the area and doesn't know much about hiking because he doesn't ever do that. But he's also a lawyer, and he's looking at this going, I can do it if I want. Because they said, please. They didn't say no or must. So,
That's part of what we'll be giving you is all the languages, and you'll be able to have wordsmith it to death as to which, and you may have different versions of the same. I mean, I don't think you want to have different versions of the same message. I think that's what's problematic out there, is you just want to settle on this is how we're going to say certain things. And I think that's why we were showing a spectrum to say, like, there are places where you have to be more, stern, more strict, and pick those places.
So I think that's totally true. I do wonder how you're gonna incorporate the etiquette signs that we already have, because I do think there's something interesting about having something creative about the signs that we have about etiquette. It catches your attention in a way that having all the signs with the same look makes it cleaner. But when you see like a sign that says like
think
Marmot is
should-
talking to you, you're like, well, I'm gonna stop.
I think
and
it might make those signs more effective.
Yeah, exactly. So
Because they're gonna, because right now they're just random signs within random signs. And then you're gonna have these other, when this is done, you have a consistent system, and that's gonna pop out as that's something different I should look at.
so it'll be, so you're saying keep those, but put them on a different side? What do you?
Yeah.
How do you, okay.
Yeah, they're just a separate, they're just a separate layer to the system. You're not gonna change them.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I'm good.
You're good. Okay.
Oh, come on. After all that?
I got extra time, remember? 'Cause I
Guys.
figured out the Zoom, so.
I'm not gonna add a lot because I think there've been tons of great comments. Jay took all my stuff, and then Dave took the rest of my stuff, and then you all took but I mean, I'd like to reiterate a couple things. Just the thought that, sign clutter is one of these terms that's been coming up with open space for so many years. And, for example, like this rendering of the All Persons Trail has 10 signs in it. And it's like a 400-yard circle,
Mhm.
So to me, that seemed like a lot. And I know that that's like, this is down the road, but the idea of kind of less is more. And Kristen made me think about the idea that whenever I've been somewhere where I don't know where I'm going, because it's really hard to like kind of get your head around the idea that you show up at the B&B parking lot and you think you're in the middle of the wilderness and it's a half a mile from my house, So I'm trying to kind of square the idea that we have to provide all this information for people, because I think it is important to do a good job with the amenities that we've created. And I think our trail system is an amenity and it's a draw. I think that's important, but I kind of am resentful for having to provide all of this information. And I think it's kind of difficult. And I think it kind of, it kind of messes up the experience in my opinion. So to try and make things less and less rather than more and more. And I know that's a really hard thing to accomplish with all the information that's being asked to be presented. But whenever I show up anywhere where I don't know where I'm going, I've done all my research before I get there because I hate getting lost and I get lost easily. So that's like another conflict.
You're a
for me.
small part of the Venn diagram.
For sure, for sure.
I think it is important that what you're saying, because we're going to put together these guidelines and they're all like the physical nature of these things, right? How to build them, where to put them, what's the best practice to put it. But then there's also this sort of overall philosophy that the town has to at some point take with that we're not going to put up a message every time someone raises their hand and wants to post it. And that's hard.
Yeah.
So you'll have all the tools, but then there's this overall sort of attitude that you have to start to take is, do we need to post this over and over and over again? That's actually the harder part. Like
How much hand holding do you want to do?
right.
Yeah, and I do like the tone of the etiquette signage a lot. I like the idea of asking people to have good manners and be considerate of each other. So that's my only little granular comment. I don't like being told what to do because I think if somebody's not going to pick up their dog poop, whether you ask them nicely or not, they're not going to pick up their dog poop. I don't care that they're not going to do it. So the idea of having a more pleasant forward-facing message is, it just appeals to me a little bit more.
If you don't enforce things, signs only do so much. I mean, I design signs for a living. You could say no parking, but people are still going to do it. You start giving people tickets, but you don't want to do that either, right? So it's like this balance between the two.
Yeah, for sure. And I'd rather be known as the community, for example, that is more pleasant and,
Yeah.
speaks to people with more respect than pick up after your dog.
Yeah.
I just don't, I don't think that's very effective. So that's my only really design thing. Man, and then everything everybody said just like changed my idea about everything, like the design stuff. But I mean, it's not what, I mean, my biggest challenges, I suppose, for you would be kind of what Jay said. Like, I'd like to not really notice it unless I need to notice it. And I think if people are looking for this information, that they should be able to find it. But I think if you know where you're going and that it's a more pleasant experience to not really even have to notice it. So I don't even know if that's possible or where that balance is, but that would be one thing. And I keep thinking of, kind of like Bobby said, as things get away from the bigger trailheads, because, just looking at this map that Brad made, like if you just zoom into like this between Main Street and 4 miles east of Main Street, there must be.
We didn't show that
100
today, but that's
intersections.
definitely part of the whole.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Mhm.
I don't have anything to add on top of that or anything anybody else said. Thanks.
John, thank you for bearing with us. I know this was a lot of
That's all good comments.
feedback. I'll just add a few, I'll keep it quick here, but I think I want to just ask you quickly, were you going to try to reuse the current totems we have? Was that
You mean the
something-
signs that are at the trailheads?
well, like that totem there to the right, like is.
Yeah, that was the direction that we were told
So we,
as much as possible.
okay. Joel mentioned to me some of them he thought were like rotted out. I'm just curious how many you think are even viable.
Yeah, it's a good question, Nikki. So some of the posts, depending on where they are, but we're getting anywhere age-wise, anywhere from 20 to 25 years
Wow.
per post.
Yeah.
That's all dependent on kind of that. And also just wanted to mention, Dylan and Silverthorne, they're using this portal post as well to
Mhm.
identify their trails.
Yeah. I think I would echo, like it's been said, sort of the tension that Jay spoke to, like the micro macro, and David and I are graphic designers. We appreciate how the process is difficult and you have to respect both ends. So I think you're doing a great job. I think you've really captured and understand our all our predicaments and all of like the need for solutions. I do think just, I know Jay thought color was too granular. I don't think of color as granular. I think of that more as highly important because it feels philosophical to me. So whether or not people land on brighter or more subdued, I'm happy with that. I noticed though, I felt like your palettes were really saturated. Like I like softer tones mixed with more saturated tones. And that was just one design consideration I wanted to mention.
Yeah, with the color, it's really more of a big picture big picture question as to, do you want it to pop or do you feel like it should sit back?
Yeah,
That's it. And then when we get into the hues and all that, I always say if we're down the color, I'm good. I can solve color. But
yeah,
the basic concept of, is this too much color for our environment? That's what the one option was. And then the other was, but does this sit back way too much? We just want to, that's all we were trying to sort of get at with the, not that it's going to be this exact purple
Right.
or this exact red or anything like that.
yeah, no, absolutely. I think like to me, the reds and yellows felt sort of abrasive.
Yeah.
So I guess I lean philosophically more towards the earthier, like natural tones. But again, that's getting a little in the weeds.
They actually, we did it abrasive on purpose because it was that question regarding, should you be telling someone not to do this or sort of sit back?
Yeah, yeah.
It was sort of a loaded color.
Yeah. I would echo what Matt said. I think when we were working on the etiquette signs, one of them says like, we are striving to be like a friendly trail community. And I think using language when you're getting buy-in, like you're a part of it, I think is really effective personally. So I just wonder, I think that is more effective to be kind and collaborative. I think this is like this feels like it's gonna rock the boat when I say this, but when I think about the pictograms, well, let me back up. When you're trying to be very critical of every single design element as a way to try to consolidate, like it seems like the goal right now is to consolidate all the design features. I actually question if we need the pictograms because they feel redundant to me to say, here's all the things you can do, and then here's all these signs that say what you can't do. And in my mind, and this is such a silly story, but when I moved here, I didn't understand the pictogram. So I would like stop at the trails and be like, can I run here? Is it on the list of the pictograms? And that probably sounds really stupid, but I wonder if other people have had that experience. Like,
Too many pictograms.
yeah, we have so many. Can we just opt to defer to like all are welcome unless it's indicated that I can't be here by a sign that says no X, Y, or Z? That just seems like
Yeah,
it would
that's
solve a
one of my
lot of-
original comments was that when you get to a certain point where you have too much information that people either ignore it or you confuse somebody.
Yeah,
So pictograms are important in trails to keep the signs small because you can't, if you start using words for everything and then you get into bilingual and all that, but no matter what you do, words or pictograms, if you do too much, it gets confusing. So that may be a philosophical thing to say, look, we're only going to say what you can't do, not get too caught up in what you, like you said, what you can do, or we were just trying to limit it. Like just do 3 or 4 pictograms and that's it. Don't put 12 of all different yes, no things and then get confusing.
yeah. I mean, as it stands to me, it seems redundant. Like I would just say what you can do as a way to keep it simple, which seems like the primary objective of what we're doing.
What you can do or can't do.
I think saying what you can't do.
Can't.
Are you thinking like in a sign or in a pictogram?
I don't know. I
Yeah,
think that
that
would
is a good
be, that's
point.
worth exploring, but as it stands to me, it's too much
Yeah.
content. We don't need, it's
Mhm.
redundant saying.
Good point.
So, and I think getting rid of what you can do is, it's less, there's less content of what you can't. So we should go that direction, I think, it's just less. And then I agree with David's comment about the difficulty rating. Well, what I would say is the difficulty rating is not a perfect system, but I think it's better than nothing. Like when I go right out in Moab, I absolutely want to know if it's, blue or black, and I adjust based on my own ability. And I think we all do that to some degree. So I would hate to get rid of it. I think it would be helpful to know if we're gonna climb a big hill like Backdoor, if you've never gone up Backdoor, that'd be a good example where knowing that would be a big climb would be nice. I think solving that problem, your work to do that is difficult, but maybe QR codes, I mean, I won't reiterate what everybody said. And then, I just thought, I would just echo back to what Jay said about like pushing the creativity piece. Just maybe there's circumstances that are one-offs where we can execute creativity. Like, for example, if you're having a hard time getting people from the shuttle to the troll, maybe we do paint like footprints, troll footprints on the concrete that like guide you, like just thinking about kids and what's effective and simple. Again, that's hard when you're trying to create a cohesive, well-branded package, but
Mhm.
maybe there's situations that are high profile enough, like the troll, where we get more creative.
Yeah, we have done creative crosswalks. We do that all the time, but my thought here was that there's snow on the ground and yeah, so much. And then the plows are going to scrape it off. There were things that I probably kicked out very quickly because of environment and
Yeah.
that
I
sort
would
of thing.
push back on that though, because the high visitorship of the trolls during the summer and it's not snowing all the
Sure.
time.
Sure.
We do have a summer. It'd be a,
We had the footprints on the parking lot.
oh, I think just guiding from the shuttle, if that's one of the, I'm just using that as an example, like utilizing creativity. We live in a mountain town. The open space is a perfect venue to utilize creativity. I just don't want it to get whitewashed where we lose all essence of just creative utilization. So, I think that would be everything for me, but I appreciate you navigating the micro macro. I think it's really challenging. And I'd be curious to hear people's thought on the pictogram idea, but we don't have to do that right now because I know it's been long. So yeah, do you have anything?
It's all
for-
good stuff.
Can I just ask one thing?
Yeah.
I was curious. I like the Toad Alley Trail, the appearance, but that's probably 8 feet tall at least, right? I'm just curious if that's something we need. Something that,
I'd love it if it really did snow that much here, but generally it does not.
yeah.
Oh, sorry. My very, very last one was Dave also designed the town of Breckenridge logo, which you should know. But I did notice that you used like features of the mark in the sign, which I thought was so clever, but we do have to be conscientious of like our partner organizations. I don't know how well.
Tony told us that.
Okay.
Duke told me.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
On that same note too, and maybe this is more of a question for you guys and Jay to take back to the council too, is I almost feel like if this isn't very widespread, I'm being redundant, but if it doesn't cover almost everything, it may not be worth doing very much at all.
When you say that, what do you mean?
Like if it doesn't encompass, and I know that the Forest Service is going to be challenging to sort of agree to go along with whatever the final decision is. So I'm kind of leaving that out of it. But I think that the town and county have jurisdiction over enough and they're, completely interchangeable with each other as far as the public is concerned, that if it's not consistent throughout at least that part of the system, then maybe it's only worth doing as, something for the very most popular trailheads, call it B&B and Horseshoe Gulch and Sally Barber or whatever, like maybe just a few areas where you can provide some consistency for where the most people who are less familiar with where they are, so they can figure that out. But if it doesn't go, if it's not consistent.
What I was writing down as you were saying that is that when we went into this, we were thinking it's basically two systems. There's the trail and then there's maybe an enhanced for the nature preserve. But it seems like there's a sort of shared trails when we have to deal with the forestry and the county, like there's sort of that network or that system. And then there's a town system, and then there's like an enhanced system for the preserve. And then maybe there's other areas that are the creative portion of it where it pushes it even more. And that we have to look at all four of those and then start to identify where where these things would happen and then balance the maintenance and that sort of thing, right? So you can't do something that's way out there on every single trail, but that doesn't mean there's not opportunities for it in certain spots. So I think we'll start to look at it that way a little bit more. We were just keeping it to more like a default system and an enhanced system. But we can layer on top of that in certain areas. We just have to identify what those areas are. Maybe it's the troll, right? Getting back to the troll.
Have you guys met with the county at all to just kind of?
They were part of the stakeholder group. They may be there tomorrow.
Yeah, so only preliminary, but they were, just a little background, because you brought this up earlier, that the last round of stakeholder groups was targeted and invite, it was other land managers and shop owners and concierges and different user groups. And now this round is BOSAC council and widespread public outreach. But so the county is involved in that level. We have been talking to them, but we need to, now that we have this, follow up and discuss some more detail.
I feel like if it's gonna die, if you get tremendous pushback, the whole thing's gonna fall apart. In my mind, so.
For sure.
No better.
Anything else for John? Thank you so much.
Thank you, John.
We appreciate all your really hard work.
No problem.
Hey, we're on to our open space grant review. Ew. It'll be brief, says Duke.
Promise.
You want to take one? Are you sure we have
I'll
exec
take one if I
session?
need
Okay.
Doesn't work anyway. Okay, so as you saw in your packet, Colorado 14-year initiatives and Friends of Dillon Ranger District applied for grants from Town of Breck using open space funds to support each of their organizations, and would love to discuss any questions regarding these, any bit about the history, and hear a recommendation if you're comfortable whether we support awarding these grants or not, and any feedback we might have for each organization. Mr. Powers.
So it looks like 14ers are asking for the same amount of money that they normally do, right? Like,
Athletics.
but it looks like it's kind of earmarked for something different this year. And I don't know the answer. I'm just asking the question. Do we care what the economic impact of?
I literally wrote that down. Do we care about?
I mean, I don't, I don't know. I don't know the answer to the question, but I'm not sure that that's the driving
Right.
impetus behind us contributing to their efforts. I thought it was more sort of trail conservation,
Go
stewardship.
to the tourism office for funding.
Which is exactly the feedback we told them we didn't need last year. Thanks to putting that in there in the packet. That was really helpful to have the summary of what we talked about last year. Sorry.
No, that's my question. I don't know. I'm posing it, I suppose, to everyone.
To your point, Matt, I looked back at all the other submittals since for the last 4 or 5 years, and every submittal's been the exact same for trail maintenance, for education, for collection of data on Quandary, and then this year was to study economic impact of basically of the tourists of 14ers in general, including Quandary. And I thought that was very non-targeted towards that, and plus not something that was in line with what we've supported in the past.
So knowing that, I don't know. I guess are there more opinions?
I talked to Brian last year about, he told me Quandary is one of the most built out. It has one of the most like durable infrastructures as far as trails go. And as such, it does require like a lot of maintenance. And I think because we're a municipality adjacent to it, we benefit economically, we co-own the parking lot. We've supported them historically. I don't know when we started, but Duke and I talked about it at least 5 years. We've supported them. We even encouraged them at one point to ask for more money. So I hesitate to just want to pull back. I mean, all that rationale to me makes sense, but I'm obviously interested to hear from if it doesn't make sense to any of you. It's worth considering.
Or could you, say you want to see the money targeted towards something else, like the maintenance or other armoring or work like that they might be doing there?
Yeah.
That was my question. Can we go back and not say we don't want to fund, but suggest an alternative? Is that a possibility?
Is there a deadline for the submission? Is that date passed?
I think this is a part of the common grant application that well, Jay's on the committee, so you could speak to that.
With the other grants, when we were going through all the grants, there was a date certain, deadline to apply by. But I'm not sure if we can modify this and how much flexibility. I know that that was really just to keep it standardized so that we would have an opportunity to set a date to go through all the grants. And I think we're like $550,000 or something in the town grants, and these are the two that live in the open space. It would come out of open space funds.
So we could go back and say, good try, but this doesn't do what our money is meant to be spent on. How about coming up with more of a maintenance plan for us? I mean, that's not violating any of our rules as far as how the grants are done.
I don't know that.
This does seem like a general grant, right? Like this isn't $10,000 just to going to Quandary, right? Because it kind of sounds like it's like, this is $10,000. Mountains like Quandary will benefit from this work. So it's not like we can really, it just, I think that's what's kind of difficult is like, you can't really narrow the scope of this because it's not going just to one mountain.
And probably when they did something for another community that had a different 14er, they said including that
Mhm.
14er.
Yeah, I just think it was an odd selection of like what they wanted to aim this $10,000 for, to specifically request for the town of Breck, because I had the same reaction as you, Matt, that I'm not sure we care about the economic impact, only because our feedback last year was that we don't necessarily want to increase numbers to Quandary. So understanding how Breck benefits from tourism to Quandary doesn't really jive with it. I don't think that that's a reason to not fund them. I think they do good work. I love their focus on sustainability. I think their answer regarding equity, I would love to see in the future this sort of grant that Breckenridge does, focus on outreach to different diverse communities or something like that. Like there's just so many ways this money can be spent, and I'm just not sure. Well, I don't know what our town would really do with, I think they're interesting numbers, but like, we're not going to make any changes. If I were on council, I don't think I would make many changes based on the results of a report like this. So.
For sure. It seems to me this falls under the BTO purview rather than.
Right,
open space.
right, yeah.
I'm just going to push back one more time, because the economic data that informs us of our economic benefit as funders is what they're seeking to update. So if they want new numbers, like Quandary Peak, those who climbed it spent an average of $271, like that number, I think if we're like, how does this relate to the town of Breck? Oh, we can point to that number. They need new data. Their data is 15 years old. So I think it's like,
I guess I'm saying, why do we need that to update that data?
well, I assume for them, it's like keeping them viable as a nonprofit organization.
I feel kind of weird about paying for them to collect data to ask us for more money.
Well, that's not the only, I mean, I'm not,
I'm being facetious, kind of, but.
well, that wasn't the only intent behind it, but I think if we want data to point to, that's what's informing the choice.
But if you look on page 16, which is the grant request strategy to address the goal, all four of those are, maybe the second one, gather demographic information to better understand the diversity, but everything else is economic spending. I mean, that's sort of I guess, four. may not be as much economic. So I don't know if there's a way to laser focus. I personally kind of know what the goal here is, and I don't love it because I feel like it's to push back on current policies. Because they've already have a history of doing that, so I'm not a huge fan.
Anyone else? Chris, I can see the wheels turning in your mind.
Yeah, to David's point, it's really hard to land on where we're at with this group currently after last year, where it was almost, it wasn't combative, but they definitely were pushing back on what we were trying to do to manage the users and the impact. And so, yeah, if they're asking for money now to try to justify upticks in those user numbers, that just, it doesn't really make much sense to fund that. Be good information to have, but I don't see what's in it for our organization.
If they change their, like we've just discussed, the intent for the funds, how would you feel about that?
Yeah, if it was what it always had been, which was to augment and repair the trail or kind of the impacts of the use on the trail, then yeah, I think that's what we would gladly fund.
If we turn them down, could they, take all their marbles and go home and say, okay, those trails are your problem now?
I
You
don't think
they would?
so.
I don't think it really impacts the year-to-year use of the trail.
No, I'm not talking about usage of the trail. I'm talking about their efforts to maintain trails for us, for that mountain.
They're one of many stakeholders as far as that trail goes, aren't they?
I don't really know. I think they're the most active that I know of, but that's sort of anecdotal. Is that your sense, Mark?
I mean, is $10,000 worth cutting off our nose to spite our face here? I mean, it's not giving us what we are very, very interested in, but does it keep them coming back to work on it? That's a question. I don't know, but
I think there's definitely like some options we could, may possibly have fund. And the reason why is, and next year, if you came to us with a proposal that specified, the maintenance work that you would like to prioritize, then we would be more willing to donate more money. I think that could be a message that we could send or talk about, or even say, hey, we are going to go along with the 10,000 this year, but next year, we really want to focus on maintenance and boots on the ground, and we don't really have, and that whatever money we donate put into that maintenance fund or something.
should we give them
Could-
5 instead of 10?
Or we could say, please can you come up with an amended way to redirect these funds towards maintenance and that it's not in our purview to be paying for economic studies out of open space funds.
Yeah, 100%.
For this grant cycle, Mark? you're
Yeah.
Talking about, I agree with that. Do you think we have that flexibility? You could,
I think so.
Just,
I would think that they could find some other use of that money, and it'd be nice to continue the partnership we have.
it's just interesting, the last line, from staff, from last year was that BOSAC would like them to focus on their mission of resource protection and stewardship and not increasing numbers of quandary. And yet
They
they
ignored it.
just completely disregarded that and went off from the last 5-year trend of stewardship to an economic study. And I know that it's a shallow game to a certain extent. Like if they had $10,000 set aside for trail maintenance, they can shift that to economic study and put our money there. And this almost seems, on the most positive way, philosophical differences, on the most negative of kind of we're going to do what we want despite the direction we were given, and almost a backlash onto the direction that was given a year ago.
Yeah, I agree. I want to fund them, and I think we had this exact same conversation last year.
question is, do they know we had that conversation?
Yeah, because Anne sent
Same
them
thing.
that exact feedback that was just read out. So I think what's frustrating is I don't feel like the town is being heard. And it is sometimes, is it semantics, like they can move the grants around, but this would be so well targeted at an area of Colorado that needs to drive economic tourism and to drive their economy. There's loads of studies by the state that are demonstrating where people should be investing in and how they can get people to these other rural towns that might have all these 14ers. Like, this is so perfect for so many communities. It's just exactly what we said we didn't want. So it's just frustrating. That all being said, I think they do great work. I just wish they'd be more receptive to the feedback that they've been given before. And if we can do what Mark has suggested and say, I would still like to fund them. I think they're a hardworking organization. I think they do really important work, but to just demonstrate that they're receptive to what the town gives in the form of feedback for what we're interested in funding would be nice to see. And if we can reorganize so that, town of Breckenridge support is going towards sustainability and trail maintenance, then I'd be all for it.
Do we feel comfortable voting on not funding them or funding them this year with the proposed amendment that Mark suggested, and also reiterating that we'd like them to take our feedback to
Yeah.
heart?
Yes.
But I thought what Mark said was that this is not an appropriate use of our.
Yeah,
funds.
I'm saying we would say you need to resubmit the grant
So
application,
we're not approving it.
not approving
Okay.
it, suggesting this is the option for this year.
Yep.
The amendment, and please know, we discussed that our feedback was not well received or not heard, and it's clear in your current application.
And I think at the same time, if it does go back to the drawing board like that, I think a resubmitted grant proposal should be very specific also about where and when and how the money will be spent, because they may have their staff moving in that direction, and this grant would, if awarded, would go to something different. Do they have the resources and the time to fulfill that responsibility? I think that would be an important part of.
They are
resubmitting.
required to submit a final report explaining how the funding was used.
Yeah, but a final report and what happens between now and the final report could be two.
Yeah. I don't think there's any way to ensure.
I know I'm
that with any
being
organization.
skeptical, but
No, it's fair.
I don't think they have bad intentions at all. I think that, I feel bad because we did go ask them that, ask for more money. We love what you're doing. Keep doing this, keep doing this, keep doing this. And then all of a sudden it changed. So.
Well, it's curious too to think about it being a national monument designation and how that impact will probably drive those numbers up even more, and how that trail management will be even more critical. I don't know. That was on my mind as well.
But I have to believe that, and while they didn't report what other grants they received from other municipalities, like if you look at the Friends of Dillon Ranger District, town of Breck contributes the most money, including from federal and state government. So if it's proportional in the same way, I think, BOSAC and the town of Breck are extremely important to their annual funding. So I would be hopeful that they would also be appreciative of our partnership like we are of theirs.
Yeah.
Well said.
Do we feel comfortable voting?
Can I ask one little nit question that it just struck me as odd, just the numbers were odd, where it talks about funding and it said 17% fundraising, 100% BOD, which I assume meant board of directors. How can 17% of funding be fundraising and 100%?
I think it means 100% of their board donates. That would be my,
Is that what that
that
means?
would be my speculation.
The OEC helps the same thing. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know for sure, but.
That is what it is.
No, I think these are all valid concerns, so that would be voting to not fund them, or what we talked about with Mark's suggestion and your clarification on, yes. So Matt, you want to start?
Oh, so the vote is are we voting yes or no, or to go back to the drawing board? Are those?
Yeah, how about
we're
those
voting on three
three?
things?
How about let's do it that way?
Voting on go back to the drawing board.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess, is that the yes plus Mark's addendum?
Mark's, like amending the rationale for the.
Amending the
funds, and
rationale,
then
but yes, I do want to fund them, yes.
This year. Oh, yeah, and I
Yes,
should have
this year.
clarified
Yes.
this year. Thank you. David, what do you think?
Yeah, back to the drawing board and a focus on what Mark is suggesting. Then I would also just, I'm gonna point it out in public. This happened last year. The data that they show neglects to include the pre-COVID data. And I think this is deliberate, and I don't love that because I think the idea here is to show that the shuttle and reservation system is negatively impacting use on the trailhead, whereas the recovery where 2021 was this very, very high peak in the middle of COVID, which was across the board. That was the way it was on trails and visitation. I really would recommend they start using pre-COVID data and be a little bit clearer about what the, I guess maybe be a little less overt about the declines being attributed to policies.
Yeah. Sure. Chris, what do you think?
Ask for resubmission outside of our guidelines, and if not that, then no.
Okay.
Can I just interject, David, just to be clear, our feedback was that they should take out the 2020 numbers. And they
No.
did. Well, that's what they got in Ann's email. I just want to call that. out.
Well, that's fine. I think I would like to see just
You want to see pre-COVID.
2019
okay.
numbers.
I got it. I'm just saying they
Yeah.
did remove the 2020 number. Maybe they meant to, maybe they didn't, but that was a change. Okay, thank you.
I would say in keeping with what the explanation is that Mark had, that this is not within our budgetary purview, this is not what we do, then we would say no and ask them for a resubmission along the lines that we've all discussed. I
Yeah.
mean, I think I would rather it not be that we're just pissed at them, but this is something we shouldn't be funding.
Great. Jay, what do you
Great.
think?
I'm good with a resubmittal, with it being specifically, the fund specifically used for Quandary for the purpose of stewardship and trail maintenance.
Great. I feel the same. Duke, do you feel like you have enough,
Mhm.
clear enough and more
Definitely.
clear enough information?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Great. All right, let's talk about the FDRD application. Is it worth Duke showing that 5-year history if it's easy?
Yeah,
Oh, it's right
Tony's
there.
got it. So this is the 5-year history for each of these organizations, and the highlighted cells indicate where they've asked for more money. And so this year FDRD increased their request to $18,000.
Thoughts on this one?
Tony, is that like a kind of cost of doing business increase, you think?
The cost of wage and has definitely gone up. And price for materials has gone up. I do have to say, working with FDRD the last 10 or 15 years, they are very helpful. And if we notice something outside our preview, say on Baker's Tank, Spruce Creek, and we point it out, they're more than willing to put that into their project scope for that year. And then also we've also partnered with them on some Friends of Breck, Lower Chantilly. They were great partners with us on that and helping out too. So they've been supportive and also receptive to where we've seen issues on the ground. They've been receptive to that as well.
Thanks.
And they're asking for more from everybody that they're on this list. Dylan,
I think
Briscoe, Silverthorne.
Growing the amount of folks and the amount of events and the amount of outreach to kids is pretty special.
You wonder with the Forest Service not hiring seasonal staff, if more burden will fall on them. Any more thoughts on this one, or we can vote if people feel comfortable? Jay, you want to kick, we'll go the other direction.
All right. This checked all the boxes for me. I think looking at this, not only am I excited to fund them what we did last year, but with the increase based on the fact that they are working on Breckenridge-based trails, they're engaging our youth, they are working on educational opportunities. They've hit all the major trailheads that they talk about that are very much amenities and open space that our bed-based uses, and I'm in full support of them.
Great.
And I agree. I think they should be funded at the amount they requested.
Agree.
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 Yes.
Me too.
Hey, Jess, can I ask you why the county, they don't approach the county for money? They do, okay. Can you make it 18,001 so I have a story to tell?
Okay, so we'll talk about our joint meeting with town council and what potential topics people want to suggest for that. Duke, do you want to say anything about that?
I'd like to say that Kelly may have input on this, I'd love to hear suggestions and if there's any consensus on any of the issues. And, we have some ideas if you're looking for them, but I think this will be a work in progress where we get some input from you and then council's going to weigh in and say ultimately probably what they want to talk about, but we're great to get POSAC input on the agenda for next month.
Do you think, is there a number you'd want to stick to, like 5, 3 to 5?
Yeah, I think
Okay.
that's right. That's what we put in the packet and I would, and then ideally have a sense of priority, maybe we don't get to number 5, so let's make sure we know what our top 3 are.
Yeah. Anyone have readily available ideas they predetermined?
I can go.
Yeah, go.
I just have one. I definitely would just like to be receptive to what council wants to talk about. I don't feel super strongly, but if we need to fill agenda items, I always want to talk about McCain. I would like to first, I'd love to get an update on the naming process, if there's been any progress on that. But then also, I just think the longer we wait, the more people call it McCain. There's now a road going in that people don't know what to call it. And so there's that aspect that we're at risk of kind of really solidifying in people's minds that that's what it's called now. And the second thing is just people have approached me from the public about very specific views on what they want. People are aware that this project is going to take place, everything from don't do anything to we want soccer fields. So I think that having an initial conversation to hear where council and where BOSAC is. I mean, I don't think we've really talked about it either. So maybe you guys can decide if it's even appropriate to bring to council before we've talked about it, but it's something that I don't want to kick the can down any longer.
Another component of that could be, we wanting to hire a consultant next year to help with the programming of it. So what we're looking for in the RFP would be a nice outcome of that conversation.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think that's a great one.
Is there a definition of open space, about what open space can be used for? I mean, we're spending money that is raised for a specific purpose. The transfer of the mill funding to us and also the density funding. So it needs to be used for what it is designed to be used for. And if we start putting Ferris wheels on open space, are we not using the funds appropriately? So I'd kind of like to know what the rules are, what the definition of open space is, and what are the parameters for use of open space.
Mark could probably speak to that.
Well, I think it's pretty loosely worded in the ballot where that's where our revenue source is sales tax.
Mhm.
So we got a lot of flexibility. I think it talks about open space and trails. But we could bring that back and take a look at it.
Well, and I think also to add on to that, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but only the western side, the west side of the river was actually purchased using open space funds. The east side of the river was not. And so when it says open space, with the view corridor on that just west of Highway 9, east of the river, that's not, it's mislabeled, if you will. It's open space in quotes, not open space restricted like west of the river.
I thought the drawing I saw showed that there was part of it that was for a bunch of other stuff, but there was a whole section on both sides of the river that were marked open space.
Right. And what I'm saying is that the west side of the river is the open space restricted because it was purchased with open space funds. The east side was what do you want to put there? Oh, let's just scribble open space for now as a placeholder. So it's confusing, and we had a long conversation.
Mark, I was gonna, speaking of, I know we're potentially beholden to the ballot language, but are we at all to like the land district guidelines?
Yeah, we gotta make sure it conforms with that. I do think though that, didn't we put money towards that 15 acres?
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
so I think-
it wasn't a one side of the river or another.
Yeah,
It was
well,
a total purchase.
right, the west side of the river was definitely what Jay said. We
Yeah.
Bought that years ago when we bought the original McCain property, but more recently, we put money in towards that 15 acres. So I think the intent is that would be
Yep.
for more traditional open space type.
I believe
uses.
that's what David wanted to pay $1 for. Remember that honestly, like it helps me remember the conversation. And that some of that area has shrunk because the river has gained sinuosity, but I thought it was between the road and the west side of the river property boundary.
Clarification, like what is the
Yeah.
town's perspective on what that land should be used for? I mean, that's the same area where the parking lot had come up, right? So I know that kind of got pushed to the side, but I think having that be a part of the conversation of what's the vision that the town wants to have. And then anything like in the future, like if we do, I mean, this is really getting ahead of ourselves now, but if we do come together on a vision between council, staff, BOSAC on what that whole area is, some way to solidify that, I think is important because this goes to the last conversation we had last time, like what if a future council or a future BOSAC does want to pave that whole space? Like what's stopping them? I just think that there's just some, I don't know. I think when it's like a multiple people paid for part of the parcel, I don't know. I don't know the answer to it, but I think long-term, it would be interesting to have that conversation about what can be done to preserve what we do come up with.
Matt, did you have any ideas?
Off the top of my head.
Okay. What about you, David? But McCain sounds good, it sounds like to everyone.
Yeah, I think McCain will speak to what we were talking about last month with, some of the purchases that we've done recently that have structures on them and how are those structures utilized, and some of them are affordable housing. And again, kind of that uncertainty of what is the long-term vision of some of these spaces that we're buying under open space, and protecting them in perpetuity, or do we need to understand something outside of that directive that there is possibility that it might be used for something else? Because I think that informs a little bit of how we kind of rolled that back up to council. So yeah, just a clear definition of what we're doing with the open space in relation to the housing issue.
And I kind of think we ought to get our new lawyer involved in an understanding of what the parameters are of the use of those funds.
We have 2 more weeks. We still have our
Oh, we don't.
interim lawyer tomorrow.
Oh, who is it?
He's dubbed himself the placeholder lawyer.
The placeholder.
Yeah.
That sounds like a TV show.
Jay, do you have ideas?
There were 2 things that I had written down was the ranger naturalist discussion of kind of where we sit on that. Do we want to continue with education? Do we want to hit, when we talk about the spectrum, right? Do we want to just keep on the very education, low infiltration, or do we want to go into a ranger format on some of our trails? Is that something that there's appetite from either side or from anyone on? And then trailhead infrastructure, trash, dog bags, restrooms, what that looks like moving forward as our trailheads get busy.
Good.
I was thinking, talking to them about the sign plan, just so we're not working siloed, which I think is kind of what happened with our master plan. So I'd like to get their take on, I mean, we can listen, tomorrow Merge is presenting to them, I think we all know, but it'd be nice to dialogue with them. And then I did talk to Kelly earlier today and she had suggested, trail, like thinking through trail options or just more broadly on the west side of the valley and specifically for Vista Verde and like what we could provide for them, which I know that's been something Dave has brought up regularly. I think we just so easily forget that west side. So, and then I guess just if we need options, the one other I have curiosity about is their vision, their broad vision for the trails, like our trail system in 20 years from now. What would they like to see? How built out is it? I'd just be curious to get their take on that, but that's obviously not terribly essential. So those were mine. Anyone think of any in the last 5 minutes they want to throw in? Okay. That's it. So we do have an exec session. So we have to say goodbye. Greg, thanks for enduring.
Hey.
That's impressive. He is an endurance athlete, so. Thanks. Greg.
Bye.
Yeah.
You don't have to leave.
So Mark and staff helped me, we actually updated this. So just a heads up, we now take a vote to enter into exec session. So I will make a motion, someone needs to second, and then I go around the room and say everybody's name, and you say yes or no if you would like to enter exec session of the BOSAC members. That makes sense?
Does.
Jay does it all the time. You're a pro.
We got it.
Okay, so I move that BOSAC go into executive session under CRS 24-6 402E. I'm sorry, 4024E for the purpose of determining positions relative to matters that may be subject to negotiations, developing strategies for negotiations and or instructing negotiators concerning a property that town may be interested in acquiring for open space purposes.
Second.
Thank you. So Matt,
Yes.
Kristen,
Yes.
David,
Yes.
Chris,
Yes.
Bobby,
Yes.
Jay.
Yes.
Okay.
Nikki.
Nikki, yes, thank you. Yes, okay. It is 8:24 PM on October 21st, 2024. For the record, I am the presiding officer, Nikki La Rochelle. As required by the open meetings law, this executive session is being electronically recorded. Also present at this executive session are the following persons: Mark Truckee, Jay Beckerman, Bobby Zanka, Chris Tennell, David Rossi, Kristen Joyce, Matt Powers, Tony Overlock, Duke Barlow, and how do you say your last name? Forsyth. Thank you. Jessica Forsyth. Okay, I caution each participant to confine all discussion to the stated purpose of this executive session and that no formal action may occur in the executive session. If at any point in the session, any participant believes that the discussion is going outside the proper scope, please interrupt the discussion and make an objection.
Hold on. Serious.